Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku saves people with his pre-born healing quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The late afternoon glow of the sweltering sun beats down on the city in the waning months of summer, painting the sky with hues of reds and oranges as it dips down towards the horizon. Weaving through the streets below, a young Izuku Midoriya sits in the back seat of his mother's car, watching the city pass by in a blur. His mother is speaking, talking to Auntie Mitsuki on the phone, but her voice is muffled, a mere background noise idly brushing his ears. Mothers always talk a lot, and he has far more important things to be paying attention to, like deciding whether that cloud looks more like All Might or Endeavor. The biased, fanboy side of Izuku wants to say All Might, but the way the light of the sun is hitting the cloud is turning it orange, making it look like Endeavor's hellflame. Izuku is still gazing at the strangely shaped cloud in contemplation when a delightful laugh slices through his thoughts, drawing his attention to the background noise that is no longer muffled. He glances away from the window at Inko. Mothers always talk a lot, but he never minds when Inko talks to Auntie Mitsuki, because Auntie Mitsuki always makes her laugh more than anyone. A part of him thinks that Auntie Mitsuki probably does it because she likes to hear Inko's laugh as much as he does. Sweet and soft, and somehow has a way of making you feel just a little bit happier to be alive, even if you're already having the best day. Izuku's glad that she has a best friend so eager to bring out that appealing laugh, and it's even better that said friend is the mother of his own best friend. They're talking about him now. Gossiping as mothers do, about their children right in front of them, as if Izuku can't hear. I was just getting a little worried, you know? Inko is saying, well, you know how anxious I get, she cuts off, and Auntie Mitsuki must have made a comment because she lets out a little snort before continuing. Anyway, so I took him to the doctor today, just to be sure he, would be manifesting a quirk, and Dr. Tsubasa reassured me that everything was fine. He took some x-rays of his feet and found that he didn't have an extra joint on his little toe. Apparently that's some indicator of quirklessness. I know, right? I didn't even realize people could have a joint there. She laughs, airy and cheerful, and it instantly brings a smile to Izuku's face. He looks down at his feet and wiggles his toes inside his shoes before going back to staring out the window. Still, he idly listens to his mother as she continues to talk to Auntie Mitsuki. So he basically told me that Izuku is just a late bloomer. It's not often kids turn 5 without manifesting their quirks, so he says that Izuku will get his any day now. Izuku can hear a muffled voice from the phone, but despite how loud his best friend's mother is, he can't make out what she is saying. However, a moment later, Inko answers his silent wonderings when she calls back to her son in a light voice. Hey, Izuku, Mitsuki-san wants to know what quirk you're hoping you'll get? Izuku blinks. Of course, that's something he's thought about a lot. His eyes are drawn back to the cloud, which he has to admit, is an Endeavor cloud. Perhaps the winds high above have shifted, but parts of the cloud are now escalating slightly, making it look even more flame-like in the light of the sun. The Endeavor cloud stands strong and proud against the crimson sky, but Izuku feels nothing but apprehension curling in his stomach. A couple of years ago, he might have wanted to be a fire breather, like his father. It would no doubt be a cool quirk to have, and maybe he could even become a hero with it. He used to watch a bunch of videos about flame heroes like Endeavor since he was so convinced he'd inherit his father's quirk. Now, however, Izuku's not as inclined towards it as before. For as long as he can remember, it's always been him and his mother. His father just hasn't been in the picture, so Izuku thinks it would be odd to get his quirk. It would be like getting a stranger's quirk. Inko always seems a bit sad whenever he asks about him, and making his mother sad is the last thing he wants to do. So perhaps it would be better for him to inherit her quirk. It might not be very strong, but that's because Inko never wanted to become a hero. Izuku's sure that if he got her quirk and he trained it strong, it would become strong enough to help him become a great hero, like All Might. Turning his gaze away from the fiery cloud, Izuku grins brightly at his mother and chirps, I want to get Mama's quirk. Inko smiles in response, and it makes Izuku's heart flutter happily. Did you hear that? She asks Auntie Mitsuki and then laughs at her response. Oh, don't be so dramatic, you know Katsuki-kun adores you too. He just doesn't want to look like such a mama's boy. Izuku giggles, already having a pretty good idea of what Auntie Mitsuki said about her son, and turns back to the window. He looks away from the clouds and turns his attention to the sky dyed with crimson. Despite the ominous color, he doesn't feel any sort of unease. Instead, he finds himself reminded of a certain red-eyed boy. Can I go hang out with Kaken when we get home? He asks abruptly. Let me ask Mitsuki-san, dear, Inko replies before doing just so. She must get an enthusiastic response, because she lets out another giggle that tickles Izuku's ears like jingling bells before saying, all right, just give us a few minutes to change and we'll be there soon. The two women bid goodbye and a minute later the Midoriyas are pulling into their driveway. Izuku immediately jumps out and starts towards Kaken's house, but Inko is quick to snatch him and shoo him into their own house to get changed. Once the two are ready, Izuku takes his mother's hand and eagerly begins leading the way down the street towards the Bakuga's residence. Their neighborhood is small and has only a handful of kids, including Tsubasa and Inaba, who both live a bit farther from Izuku than Kaken does. But Izuku doesn't mind the small size, and the lack of a large friend group has never bothered him. Why would he ever need anyone other than Kaken? Speaking of, the sky has darkened now, but Izuku finds the same shade from earlier in the pair of eyes that pop out from behind the window as they approach the Bakuga's house. Oi, Izuku! Kaken's shout is muffled. Hurry up, slowpoke. Kaken, you little get down from there. Go away, old hag. Kaken disappears from the window and shouting erupts from within the house. Izuku giggles and Inko lets out a fond sigh as they approach the door, no doubt steeling herself for a very loud night. She knocks and the door swings open, revealing Kaken and a very irritated-looking Auntie Mitsuki behind him. Her expression smooths out the second she sees Inko and she spreads her arms welcomingly. Inko-san, come in, come in. Hey there, little Izuken. Izuku blushes as she ruffles his hair and Kaken groans in annoyance. The blonde brushes past his mother and grabs him by the arm before beginning to drag him towards his room. Auntie Mitsuki scowls at her son as they pass. Oi, dinner's gonna be ready in 20 minutes, you hear? She snaps, don't start making a mess. We won't. Izuku reassures her as he gets pulled along, but Auntie Mitsuki just smiles sweetly at him. Oh, Izuken, you know I don't mean you. She sends a pointed glare at Kaken, who just rolls his eyes. Yeah, fine. Can we go, Izuku? He takes the smaller boy to his room and shuts the door loudly. Turning to him, the blonde demands, well? Tsubasa-kun said Auntie was taking you to see his grandpa about your quirk. What did he say? Izuku ponders. The doctor visit this afternoon was a bit boring. Dr. Tsubasa said a lot of stuff and spoke more to his mother than to him, but Izuku dutifully recounts the gist of what he understood of the events that transpired, and when he's finished Kaken huffs and folds his arms. Well, what's taking so long? He asks impatiently. Izuku gives a small, clueless shrug. I dunno, but he said it's gonna come any day now. I'm excited. He clenches his fists and beams at his friend. I can't wait to be a hero like All Might. Kaken scowls. Nah, I'm gonna be like All Might. He opens his palms and lets out a couple of explosions as if to prove his point. I'm gonna be the best hero ever. Better than All Might even. Izuku's eyes widen. Better than All Might? He asks in awe. No way. Yes way. Just you wait. Kaken brushes past Izuku to a basket of toys leaning against his wall. Once I get bigger, I'm gonna beat up all the villains in the world. No one will beat me. You'll see. Izuku gazes after his friend fondly. Kaken is loud and abrasive, just like his quirk, but he's also the most determined person Izuku knows. Nothing ever seems to scare him or make his confidence waver. He's just amazing. Even before his quirk manifested, he was always amazing. His quirk just made him even cooler. Not cooler than All Might, though. Kaken, his back still turned to Izuku, proceeds to turn the basket over and dump all of his toys on the ground. Izuku frowns. Kaken, your mom said not to make a mess, he says uneasily. Kaken scoffs. Who cares what that old hag says? Come on, I want to play heroes. He takes out an All Might action figure and pushes an Endeavor figure towards Izuku. Here, you can be my sidekick? A bit disgruntled but used to it by now, the few times he's insisted on being the main hero Kaken had been irritated the entire time, Izuku takes the toy and settles down next to him. Kaken quickly starts setting up a narrative, using dramatic voices and his quirk for effects. As they play, their mother's muffled chatting coming from the kitchen, Izuku thinks back to their earlier discussion. I wonder what quirk I'll get? He ponders aloud. Kaken stops swooping the All Might action figure through the air and gives him a look. I hope I get Mama's quirk. Or maybe a mix of hers and Dad's, although I don't know if that can happen. Kaken stares at him for a few moments, then turns away with a dismissive snort. Well, no matter what quirk you end up with, you'll never be able to beat me. As soon as he says that, Auntie Mitsuki's voice calls from the kitchen, telling them that dinner is ready. Kaken quickly scrambles to his feet and runs out the room. Izuku doesn't follow for a few moments, instead sitting back and listening as the mother and son start snapping at each other. Kaken's words leave an odd feeling in his tea. He wouldn't say they hurt, because he knows better than to put so much personal offense behind the boy's words. Kaken is always rude and often speaks without thinking. That's just the way he is, and he should be used to it by now. Nerd. Get over here, we're eating sukiyaki. Ignoring the odd ache in his heart, Izuku gets to his feet and dashes over to the kitchen. Coming. Now that they know with certainty that Izuku will be getting a quirk, all that is left to do is wait. And so they do. Every morning, Izuku wakes up, expecting to feel different, expecting for this to be the day his quirk will manifest. Every morning, he attempts to telekinetically pull objects towards himself or to breathe fire. And every morning, nothing seems to change. Nothing seems different. At first, he doesn't worry about it too much. 1 week since seeing Dr. Tsubasa goes by, and life goes on as normal. But then 1 week turns into 2, then into 3, then into a month. By the end of October, just over 2 months since he turned 5, Izuku still has yet to manifest his quirk and he's beginning to get impatient. Kaken is too. Not only that, but he seems to also be getting disappointed. Bored with Izuku. The greenette can see it in his eyes after each time he asks if his quirk manifested that day, after each time he replies negatively. He can see the lightest interest, the way he turns and chooses to spend more and more time with Tsubasa and Inaba, both of whom have already manifested their quirks. It leaves an unsettling feeling in his gut. He doesn't understand. Why won't his quirk come? It will come, won't it? The doctor said it would, but people whisper things around him now. His teachers give him concerned, pitying glances when they think he's not looking. His classmates are confused and mutter to each other behind his back. Then one day, Inaba says it. Maybe he just doesn't have a quirk? Izuku freezes. He, Kaken, Tsubasa, and Izuku are exploring a nearby forest after school, one they've been to a few times before. The 3 boys still let Izuku tag along on their adventures, but lately he can tell it's with some reluctance, so he hangs back. Still, despite being a few feet behind the trio, he hears Inaba's suggestion loud and clear. That's stupid, how could he not have a quirk? Kaken snaps, and a part of Izuku is relieved that his best friend is defending him, despite having disappointed him. But then Tsubasa pipes up, my dad says it's called being quirkless. And that word. The one people have been whispering around him, acting like he can't hear. Quirkless. As in without a quirk? No, it's impossible. Sure, he's a little later than normal, but the doctor. Some people are just born without them. Tsubasa continues, oblivious to Izuku's inner turmoil, my great-aunt doesn't have one dash. I'm gonna have a quirk. Izuku insists, interrupting him. The 3 glance over their shoulders at him, and he falters. But I don't have an extra toe joint, he explains hesitantly. Dr. Tsubasa-san said that all quirkless people have an extra toe joint but I don't, so I'm just a late bloomer. The trio share dubious glances before Kaken tosses his head and scoffs. Well, then hurry up already, Izuku. We've been waiting forever. Izuku smiles nervously and trots after them as they continue their exploration of the forest. He'll get his quirk. Doctors are smart people, Inko says to listen to them. He just needs to be patient. Soon enough, His presence fades into the background once again as Kakin decides to start showing off his quirk now that there are no adults around. Tsubasa and Inaba encourage him to make bigger explosions, whooping with excitement each time they grow in size. Kakin preens under all the attention, gloating over the power of his quirk as he braces himself for another explosion. "Get ready, guys, this one is gonna be the biggest," he hollers, holding his palms out. Izuku smartly decides to take a step back and watches as his friend tenses up before unleashing an impressive explosion. His awe is short-lived, interrupted by a pained yelp from Kakin. "Kakin!" he cries out, rushing to the blonde who is clutching his wrists with gritted teeth. Tsubasa and Inaba are closer to him, but somehow Izuku reaches his side first. "What happened?" He takes Kakin's wrists in his hands and frowns at the sight of slightly burned skin on his wrists and palms. Kakin pushes his discomfort away and glances at Tsubasa and Inaba. "Quit worrying, it's nothing, guys." He scoffs dismissively, "Just happens sometimes when I overuse my quirk." As he talks, Izuku keeps staring down at the boy's injuries. The skin feels hot beneath his fingers, but there's something else to it too. Something strange. Like there's an odd substance? Or perhaps a presence. He isn't quite sure how to name it, but he can feel it lingering right underneath Kakin's skin. Without his awareness, he finds his eyes fluttering shut. As he focuses on that strange heat, he's surprised to discover something similar swirling within him. He doesn't even notice it until he feels it flowing out of him, through his hands and into Kakin's skin. It all happens so quickly and ends abruptly when Kakin notices Izuku still holding onto him and yanks his wrists out of his hands. "Oi, what are you doing, idiot? I said I'm Dash." The blonde stops mid-sentence, glancing down at his hands in surprise. His eyes widen. "It feels better," he murmurs in shock. His head snaps up to Izuku, glaring. "What did you do?" Izuku is confused until he notices that the burns on Kakin's hands are completely gone, the skin unmarred. "What happened?" Inaba asks, stepping closer to observe Kakin's wrists. "Hey, your burns are gone." "Yeah, no sheet, but how?" Kakin snaps, still glaring at Izuku. The other two boys turn to look at him. "Did you do this, Midoriya-kun?" Tsubasa asks, tilting his head curiously. Izuku anxiously shifts his feet under the attention and wrings his hands. I don't know," he squeaks. I don't know, it felt weird." "I don't know what happened." Inaba blinks and his eyes widen. "Hey, maybe this is your quirk? Try it again." Izuku turns to Kakin, who is still glaring, and holds out his hands. Kakin huffs and begrudgingly lets Izuku hold his wrists. Izuku tries to find that strange warm sensation again, but it seems to have vanished alongside Kakin's burns. He frowns. "I don't think I can do it now," he says. "The feeling is gone. I don't know how to get it back." "Well, what did it feel like?" Inaba asks, surprisingly patient. "Describe what happened." Izuku presses his lips together and tries to find the right words. "It was like, warm?" Kakin's burns, but not his skin. It was like something underneath his skin. It wasn't like regular warm either. I don't know how to describe it, but I could just feel it. And then I felt the same thing in me? Except it was leaving. It was like flowing out of me into Kakin, and then his burns were gone." He trails off uncertainly. The feeling was so strange and alien that it kind of scares him, especially not knowing what it is. They all turn when Tsubasa suddenly spreads his wings. "Hold on, I've got an idea," he says before disappearing up into the trees. There's a moment of silence, then the sound of leaves rustling and branches snapping. A bird shrieks, making Izuku flinch, before Tsubasa reappears. "Here," he says, landing in front of them. He pushes a small bird into Izuku's hands and says, "I broke its wing. See if that weird feeling comes back." "What?" Izuku exclaims, "Tsubasa-kun, that's so mean." "Poor bird." Tsubasa rolls his eyes, but Izuku doesn't notice, too busy focusing on the bird in his palms that is frozen in fear. As soon as his fingers brush over the bird's wing, he feels the strange warmth again. This time, though, he can feel it swirling around the bird's wing joint. The word dislocated comes to mind. He sees it happening to heroes' arms sometimes in movies. Closing his eyes, he tries to summon the warmth within him that he felt earlier, only to discover that it's already flowing out of him. Now that it's not as shocking anymore, he takes the time to really focus on the feeling and try to decipher what it is. Ow! He yelps, dropping the bird. It unfurls its wings and takes flight, fleeing back up into the trees. He frowns down at his finger where the bird pecked him, but there's no BLD. Hey, it worked! Inaba exclaims, you healed it. You have a healing quirk. Cool. Tsubasa grins. What? Kaken barks, scowling. That's not possible. His parents don't have healing quirks? Inaba shrugs cluelessly. I dunno, man, maybe it skipped a generation or two? That's really cool, though, Midoriya-kun. Tsubasa says, I've never seen one like that before. How does it work? What does it feel like? Taken aback by the sudden positive attention, Izuku flounders for a moment. It felt like... He racks his brain, trying to find the right word to describe the feeling. It felt like energy. Yeah, like energy or something. It's like I pushed my energy into the injury and it got better. Oh, and I could also kind of tell what the injury was? Like I could feel Kaken's energy swirling around his burns and the bird's around its wing, but with the bird I could tell that its wing wasn't broken but dislocated. 'Cause, it was like the energy was more focused around the joint? Like it was trying to fix it? It sounds confusing even to him, and one look at his friends' faces tells him they think so too. But his confusion is being pushed aside by his excitement. This is his quirk. He finally got his quirk. Oh my gosh, I have a quirk now. He exclaims, jumping up and down. I have a quirk, I have a quirk. Inaba laughs. Well, come on. Let's see if you can heal more stuff. With a mischievous grin, he reels his fist back and punches Tsubasa's shoulder. Oh, Tsubasa growls. Before he can poos on Inaba, however, Izuku latches onto his arm and wow, he doesn't even have to try to use his quirk, it just activates automatically as soon as he feels an injury. Whoa! Tsubasa breathes, flexing his arm, the pain went away so fast. Thanks, Midoriya-kun. The praise has Izuku's heart fluttering and he can't help the grin that breaks out on his face. Hey, I wanna try. Inaba whines, punch me, punch me. Hey, Kaken says, but he gets ignored. Tsubasa snickers and is more than happy to sock Inaba in the arm. The boy hisses but soon smiles when Izuku eagerly uses his quirk on him. Man, you're so lucky. Inaba says, that's gonna be such a useful quirk. Hey, Kaken repeats. Let's go see what else you can heal, Tsubasa says. Hey, idiots. Kaken finally snaps. We're not doing that. Tsubasa and Inaba turn to him and whine but he merely snarls back at them. I'm taking Zuka back to Auntie. This is weird shit and we've got to figure out what's going on before he gets hurt. Hurt? How would he get hurt? Inaba tilts his head. Kaken gives him, are you stupid? Look. All quirks have drawbacks, especially when they're overused, he says, flexing his wrists. Inaba opens his mouth to argue, then closes it and frowns thoughtfully. Izuku's a bit disappointed he just got his quirk and now Kaken wants him to stop using it, but then notices something. He's a bit tired, not terribly so, but more than he usually is at this time of the day. Perhaps the whole energy transfer thing drains his own energy? I guess I am feeling a bit tired, he admits. Kaken arches his brow at Inaba as if to say, see, and the other boy just rolls his eyes. Fine, we'll play with it more tomorrow, Inaba says. Yeah, you gotta show the class, Tsubasa says. Izuku smiles. I can't wait. Kaken decides that it's time to go and grabs him by the arm, dragging him back towards the street. Thanks for helping me figure out my quirk, guys. He calls back. Yeah, no problem. Congrats. Still beaming. Izuku turns back around and lets himself be dragged by Kaken. He still can't believe this is happening. He's never been so confused and happy in his life. Isn't this great, Kaken? He says, I finally have a quirk. Kaken doesn't look at him as he replies, yeah, great. His tone is low and he doesn't sound too happy. Izuku's enthusiasm wanes. What's wrong? He asks, confused. Nothing. Kaken retorts, let's just get you to Auntie. She'll figure out what's going on. Izuku pouts. Thankfully, The walk back home is short, so soon he's SWing the front door open and crying out, "Mama, Mama, I got my quirk." "What?" Inko exclaims, rushing over from the kitchen. "Oh, sweetie, that's wonderful." She scoops Izuku up and presses numerous embraces onto his cheeks. He whines and tries to squirm away. Kaken fidgets impatiently by the door. "Oh, my baby, I'm so happy for you." Finally managing to push her face away, Izuku says, "And you'll never guess what it is." "Oh?" Inko asks, feigning confusion. "What is it?" "Healing," Kaken interrupts. She turns to the blonde in surprise and he stares back up at her sullenly. "It's some sort of healing quirk?" "Huh." Now Inko's confusion is real. Izuku nudges her repeatedly and whines, "Mama, you never told me we had healing quirks in our family." Inko is still glancing between the two boys, her mind clearly whirling. "Don't," she says softly, his brow furrowing. "Honey, are you sure?" "Yeah," Izuku says enthusiastically. Inko blinks and glances at Kaken, who is gazing at her with an unusually serious expression. "Katsuki-kun?" she questions with an uncertain tone. Sensing her hesitance, Kaken huffs and stomps into the kitchen. He pulls out a small knife from the drawer, alarming Inko, but before she can stop him he purposefully slices the edge of his palm. "Katsuki-kun, what on earth are you doing?" "Zuku," Kaken says, holding his palm up to the smaller boy who is squirming out of his mother's grasp. "Show her." Izuku takes Kaken's hand in his and his quirk immediately flows. "Now hold on, you can't just— oh." Inko's eyes widen comically as the cut vanishes within seconds. For a few moments she just stares, even when Izuku beams up at her proudly. "See?" She blinks slowly, a soft "oh" escaping her lips. Okay." She speaks haltingly as if she's still trying to wrap her brain around the situation. Okay. Let's. She straightens up and looks down at Izuku, plastering on a nervous smile. "Why don't we visit Dr. Tsubasa-san again, honey, okay?" "Okay." Izuku agrees cheerfully, bouncing from foot to foot. Kaken is still frowning. "Kaken-kun, why don't you head home? And maybe have your mother check out your hand?" "But his hand's fine, see?" Izuku says, "I healed it." "I know, honey, but just in case," Inko says, quickly grabbing her purse and keys and herding the kids to the door. "Come on then." Izuku bids Kaken goodbye and Inko watches the boy until he has disappeared down the street before she puts her son into the car and drives off. Dr. Tsubasa looks stunned when Inko tells him about Izuku's strange new quirk, but he doesn't look disbelieving. Instead, he calmly retrieves a scalpel and scrapes off a small amount of skin on his wrist before asking Izuku to demonstrate his ability. The boy happily obliges and the doctor watches with fascination as his own skin heals right before his eyes. "Well," he huffs good-naturedly, "that's a healing quirk all right." Inko's eyes widen as Izuku squeals in excitement. "Really?" he asks, eyes sparkling. "Yes, and a pretty powerful one if I'm not mistaken," Dr. Tsubasa replies, much to the delight of the young boy. "A healing quirk. He really has a healing quirk. And a powerful one." "But Tsubasa-san," Inko says, smiling hesitantly at her son's happiness, "I don't understand. No one in my family or my husband's family has a healing quirk, at least, none that we knew of. And I wouldn't expect them to," Dr. Tsubasa explains, notably looking at both Inko and Izuku as he does so as opposed to only the former like he did during their earlier visit. "You see, healing quirks are exceptionally rare and one of the reasons for that is because they're not hereditary, meaning that they aren't passed down through genetics. Only a small amount of quirks spontaneously manifest in people without a prior genetic inclination for that quirk, and an even smaller amount of that small amount are healing quirks." He smiles at Inko. "Your son has something truly special here, Midoriya-san." Inko inhales sharply and smiles again, this time more warmly. "Oh," she breathes, tucking her son closer to her side, "that's good then." "Very good," the doctor says. "In all my years as a medical professional, I've never seen a quirk like his before. Healing quirks usually work by manipulating some aspect of the patient's body to help them heal faster. I'm sure you've heard of the youthful heroine recovery girl?" Both Inko and Izuku nod, the latter more vigorously. "Well, Her quirk speeds up a person's natural healing ability by drawing from their stamina. An old colleague of mine could manipulate BLD, which was helpful in stopping bleeding. I've also heard of a handful of people with pain-stopping quirks. But this energy transfer that your son has described, well, I've never seen anything like it. And the speed that his quirk healed at. He laughs incredulously and shakes his head. It's truly amazing. I'm envious even. Most doctors and nurses either have diagnosis-like quirks or more minor healing quirks. People with stronger healing quirks are so rare they're usually snatched up by hero agencies as soon as possible. Izuku gasps at the words, hero agencies, and clutches his mother's arm excitedly. Inko brushes her hand through his hair, but her smile wavers slightly. So, Izuku's quirk, she starts, everything's alright then? It's so unfamiliar and rare that I can't help but worry. Oh yes, of course, Dr. Tsubasa says, all quirks have drawbacks, as I'm sure you know. From what Izuku has told me and from what I've seen, it seems like his quirk relies on him passing his own energy to someone else. He mentioned being tired after using it a lot, so I assume that limited amount of energy to give, and if he overuses his quirk he'll exhaust himself. So he turns to fix Izuku with a kind but firm look. Let's not use your quirk to heal every single scrape and bruise your friends might get, okay? Izuku smiles and nods. Okay, good. Dr. Tsubasa nods and pats his head. Well, aside from that, you should have no worries. He smiles when he says that, but for some reason his smile seems to falter after a moment. Izuku doesn't notice, already getting up as the doctor's tone of voice suggests the appointment is about to finish, but Inko notices it immediately. She stands up when the doctor does and begins walking with her son to the door. Before she leaves, however, Dr. Tsubasa stops her with his arm. He hesitates, then smiles down at Izuku. Hey, Midoriya-kun, why don't you play with the toys in the waiting room for a little bit? He suggests, his voice light. I just need to talk to your mother about some paperwork for a few minutes. Izuku simply shrugs. Okay. They wait for him to leave, then shut the door behind him. He skips down the hall into the waiting room, humming in contemplation. Dr. Tsubasa said a lot of things with a lot of big words, but Izuku thinks he understood most of it. Excitement bubbles in his quirk is super rare and he can help people with it. Can this day get any better? When he re-enters the waiting room, he spies a basket of toys in the far corner. There are already a couple of kids playing, but he figures he can join them. Before he might have hesitated, but he has a quirk now, why should he? The two kids smile at him and let him join their game, and when the topic of quirks inevitably comes up he cheerfully proclaims that he has a healing quirk. Their eyes widen and they union, causing pride to fill his eyes. Having a quirk to be proud of is something new and amazing for him. God, he's so happy his quirk manifested. They play for a few minutes while talking about their powers. Oki-kun can make plants grow when she spits on dirt and Yamabe-kun can turn strong objects soft. Then they both get called in for their appointments and Izuku is only alone for a minute before his mother returns. He beams at her, but for some reason she looks troubled. Mama? He questions, but she merely plasters on a fake smile and tells him that it's time to go. The anxious look on her face doesn't disappear on the drive home, and when he tries to distract her with conversation her replies are short and tense. Izuku doesn't understand. The doctor just told them great news and his quirk is even better than he expected. Why isn't she happy? She also takes them straight to Kaken's house instead of their own home. Uncle Masaru is surprised when he answers the door but welcomes them in anyways. Zuku! Kaken shouts as a greeting. He stomps over and demands, what did the doctor say? Auntie Mitsuki ruffles her son's hair and ignores his indignant squawking. The little brat told us what happened today. She props her hand on her hip. So is it true? Does Izukin have a healing quirk? Why yeah, apparently, Inko replies, rubbing the back of her neck. It's super rare but healing quirks just manifest spontaneously, so they're not passed down from the parents. Izuku can kind of pass his energy to other people? And I guess that heals them. Wow, Auntie Mitsuki says, flashing a grin at Izuku, nice one kiddo. Yeah, Uncle Masaru agrees, but then trails off when he looks at Inko. He must see something in her expression because he turns to the two young boys and says, hey, How about you guys go play in Katsuki's room? Izuku looks up. Oh, okay. Kaken scoffs and starts pulling him towards his room, but instead of going inside he stops at the end of the hallway. Turning to Izuku, he presses a finger to his lips and crouches down. Kaken? Izuku whispers, "What are we doing?" "Shoo." Kaken hisses back, "Idiot. They sent us away because they want to talk about stuff behind our backs." Izuku blinks and then tilts his head in confusion. Then, shouldn't we leave? Kaken scowls and covers the other boy's mouth with his hand, leaning closer to the entrance of the hallway so he can hear better. "Inko-san?" Uncle Masaru asks quietly, "Is everything okay?" There's a few moments of silence, then a soft sniffle. "Inko-san." Auntie Mitsuki cries out a little too loudly, causing her husband to shush her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, nothing." Inko replies hastily, but her voice breaks. Nothing's wrong with Izuku. I'm happy for him, really. It's just, her voice trails off and she sniffles a couple more times, trying not to hiccup. Hearing his mother struggle not to cry makes Izuku want to go out and comfort her, but Kaken holds him still. Uncle Masaru's voice speaks up, "Why don't we sit down and you can tell us what happened?" Inko must nod because there's the sound of footsteps and then chairs scraping against the floor. Izuku hears his mother inhale shakily before beginning to speak. "It's just something the doctor wanted to warn me about before we left. I don't mean to scare you with what I'm about to tell you, Midoriya-san," Dr. Tsubasa says as he closes the door behind him, "but considering the situation, I just feel I have to give you a heads up. Please, take a seat." Inko does, and the doctor sits in a stool across from her. Clasping his hands in front of him, he says, "I just need to emphasize how rare your son's quirk is. And how powerful it could potentially become. He's only 5 years old and yet he was able to completely heal a dislocated bird's wing. I have no doubt his quirk will only strengthen with age, but..." He trails off for a moment, then asks, "How much do you know about Recovery Girl?" Inko blinks in surprise, then admits, "Not much really. I just know she works at UA." Dr. Tsubasa nods. She is also considered to have one of the most powerful healing quirks in Japan, if not the most powerful. She doesn't do this as often anymore, but she used to travel all across Japan and sometimes the world to heal people with her quirk. She's also the only reason UA can train their students the way they do. Without her, I'm sure the school would have to face numerous lawsuits from parents whose children come home from school injured every day. And since healing quirks are so rare, hero agencies never seem to have enough healers and they often travel between agencies to help out where they are needed. He pauses, opens his mouth, then closes it. Finally, he settles on, "Basically what I'm trying to say is, Izuku will be highly sought after once people become more aware of his quirk." "Oh." Inko says, That's wonderful. Izuku has always loved heroes, he wants to be one too, although I suppose with his new quirk things might happen a bit differently. But I'm sure he'd be thrilled to work with them." She smiles, but it fades away quickly at the look on the doctor's face. "What is it?" "It's just," he sighs, then meets her gaze head-on and says, "Healers are not only sought after by heroes. It's not unheard of for villains to seek out healers and try to kidnap them, especially organized crime groups. See, they can't go to the hospital if they get hurt in a fight, so healers are valuable to them too. Hero agencies usually keep their healers close and protected at all costs, especially in the most recent decade, but, well, I'm sure you heard of the incident with the healer at Endeavor's agency, yes?" "No, I haven't," Inko replies, clutching her purse anxiously. "Oh, well, I suppose it's been a while. Probably only a couple of years before Izuku was born, actually. Well, there was a bit of drama going on with Endeavor's hero agency because his healer was stolen by villains. Endeavor managed to rescue him a couple of days later, of course, but it was quite the scandal. People criticized Endeavor rather harshly, but it ended up with hero agencies significantly increasing the protection around their healers, so overall there was a good outcome." Inko nods and looks down at her shoes, biting her lip as her anxiety rises. Dr. Tsubasa notices and places his hand over hers. "I'm sorry, I really don't mean to scare you with this. I just need you to be aware," he says soothingly. "Izuku's quirk is wonderful, but you just need to keep a close eye on him. Right now he's at his most vulnerable because he's young and cannot defend himself. Maybe just make sure he always has a friend with him when he walks home from school. At this point, Inko is fighting off tears. Oh God, she hiccups. I don't know. I never thought about this. I never even considered. She sniffles and lets out a wavering sigh. Izuku loves heroes and I'm sure he'll want to use his quirk to help them, but should I not let him? Should I just dash? Actually, Dr. Tsubasa interrupts, his love for heroes is a good thing. If he wants to become a hero healer then he absolutely should. But you just said dash. His quirk will get attention no matter where he goes, he says, but if he ends up working with heroes then he'll have their protection. That's why I said most doctors and nurses have minor healing quirks, because people with powerful ones often catch the attention of heroes, who will in turn protect them from any villains who also have their eye on them. Oh, okay, Inko says, nodding rapidly. She takes a deep breath and nods once more, her mind racing. This is a lot, but she exhales sharply and laughs shakily. Heh, and I was worried he'd breathe fire. The doctor chuckles sympathetically before sobering up. He pats her hand and smiles at her reassuringly. Don't ever forget Izuku's quirk is a good thing. He just needs to be a bit more careful than most children. Inko sniffles and wipes her watery eyes. Uncle Masaru hands her a tissue that she gratefully accepts and dries off her tears. Wow, Auntie Mitsuki says, her voice unusually soft. Long day, huh? Inko lets out a wet laugh. I'm sorry I probably look like such a mess. She apologizes profusely. It's just the thought of some villains snatching up my poor baby. Hey, that's not gonna happen, Auntie Mitsuki reassures. We're not gonna let that happen. I'll make sure our little brat stays by his side at all times. Huh. Inko says, oh no, I don't want to impose dash. Nonsense. Auntie Mitsuki insists, they're already best friends, it wouldn't be any trouble. And perhaps, Uncle Masaru suggests, when Izuku is a bit older he can take some self-defense classes. Oh. Inko perks up a bit. That's a good idea. Maybe. As the parents continue to discuss things quietly, Izuku and Kaken listen from the hallway. Izuku is struggling to understand what's going on. His mother sounded so sad that he kept wanting to run to her side and comfort her, but Kaken kept grabbing him and holding him back. They tried to keep their tussing as quiet as possible, but Izuku still missed some of what was said. He kept hearing the words healer, Izuku's quirk, danger, and heroes, and combining that with what little else he heard, his mind comes to the realization that he's been wondering about ever since his quirk manifested. I can become a hero, he says to Kaken excitedly. Unfortunately, he also said it a bit too loudly and conversation in the other room stops. Shoo! Kaken hisses, but it's too late. Boys. Auntie Mitsuki barks, come out here. Glaring at Izuku, Kaken huffs and begrudgingly walks out of the hallway, the smaller boy on his heels. Auntie Mitsuki frowns at them as they approach the table where the adults are sitting. You shouldn't eavesdrop, she scolds. Sorry, ma'am, Izuku begins to say, only to be interrupted by Kaken. What's going on here? He snaps. Why would someone want to take Izuku? His quirk isn't that cool. What? Yeah, it is. Izuku protests, but shrinks away when his friend glares at him. I can be a hero with it. Kaken snorts. What? No way. You're just gonna become a doctor or some sheet. Don't say sheet like that, brat. Auntie Mitsuki snaps, but her son merely rolls his eyes. Dismayed, Izuku glances from Kaken to the adults and cries, but I don't want to be a doctor, I want to be a hero. And you can be a hero, Inko says, causing Izuku to beam. Well, sort of. I was just talking about it with Dr. Tsubasa-san. You can be a hero healer. The children share the same confused expression and both tilt their heads nearly simultaneously. What? Ha! A hero healer, Uncle Masaru explains, all hero agencies have them. They're people with really good healing quirks that heal heroes when they get hurt while fighting villains. Oh. Izuku blinks thoughtfully. He'd never really thought about something like that before. Of course heroes need healers, it makes sense that they would. They don't just magically get better after all. But him? A healer? He isn't sure. Kaken sniffs and tosses his head. Well, when I'm a hero I won't need one. he says braggingly, "I'll be so strong I'll never get hurt." He flashes his quirk to prove his point, but shrieks furiously when Auntie Mitsuki gives him a little slap on the back of the head. "Of course you're gonna get hurt, you little sheet," she snaps. "All heroes get hurt one way or another. Didn't you just say Izuken healed you when you overused your quirk?" Kaken grumbles angrily and looks like he wants to argue back, but Uncle Masaru eases the tension by saying, "Even All Might's agency has healers." Kaken and Izuku perk up at this, so the man smiles and adds, "Every hero needs a healer and, according to Dr. Tsubasa-san, they're apparently in high demand. Yeah, so you better keep little Izuken close or another hero will snatch him up." Auntie Mitsuki teases. Kaken's eyes widen and dart from his mother to his friend before they narrow. "What the hell? No way." He growls, "If you're gonna be anyone's healer, you're gonna be mine." He grabs onto Izuku's arm and the smaller boy giggles. Everyone has been looking at him with bright and hopeful eyes ever since he manifested his quirk just a few hours ago. Tsubasa and Inaba were actually pretty nice to him. Usually they either ignore him or tease him as they follow Kaken around. And Dr. Tsubasa, he seemed really impressed with his quirk. And Auntie Mitsuki, Uncle Masaru, and Inko are all really enthusiastic about this whole healer thing, but I won't really be a hero, will I? He asks, his voice downtrodden. The adults turn to him in surprise. "I thought maybe if I got Mama or Papa's quirk I could," but he looks down at his hands. He can still remember the feeling of his energy being passed to the bird's wing. He clenches them. Looking up at his mother, he struggles to keep the tears out of his eyes as he says, "I can't beat up villains with a quirk like this. I can't protect people, so how could I really be a hero?" Kaken is gazing at him with an odd expression, like he can't quite decide how he feels about the situation. Izuku sniffles and rubs his nose with the back of his hand as Auntie Mitsuki kneels down in front of him. "Hey, healers are important too, you know," she says, knocking his forehead lightly with her knuckle. "Don't dismiss yourself so easily. Yeah, it's a bit of a change of plans for you, but that doesn't mean you can't still be a hero. Hell, you're literally gonna be the hero of heroes. So chin up, kiddo." Izuku blinks at her with wide eyes. The hero of heroes? That does sound kind of cool. And Inko says, joining Auntie Mitsuki, "You won't be giving your poor mother anxiety about you putting yourself in danger every day?" Auntie Mitsuki barks out a laugh and Uncle Masaru smiles. "Then why'd you sound so upset?" Kaken asks, bringing attention back to him. "We heard Auntie crying." The three adults share glances between them, obviously silently communicating. It clearly frustrates Kaken, but soon his father sighs softly and explains. "We're just worried about people taking advantage of Izuken," he says. "Do you know what that means?" Izuku frowns. "I heard Auntie say that bad people want to take Zuku," Kaken declares. Auntie Mitsuki huffs, grumbling something about eavesdropping under her breath. Uncle Masaru puts a hand on her shoulder, but the next moment she straightens up and fixes Kaken. With a strong look. "Well, you won't let that happen now, will you?" she snaps. Kaken scowls. "Ha! If some fucker comes along and decides to snatch Izuken because he wants to force him to use his quirk, what are you gonna do?" Auntie Mitsuki asks. Uncle Masaru tries to warn her not to be so blatant about it so to not scare the kids, but her fiery question gets the reaction she wanted. "I'll beat him up, of course." Kaken jumps up, flaring his quirk. "I'll beat up any fucker who tries to take him." "That's right." Auntie Mitsuki nods approvingly, then roughly ruffles her son's hair. Kaken grumpily shoves her hand away and scoffs. That's what you were so worried about." His gaze lands on Inko, who is looking at him with watery eyes and a smile, and he blushes. He glances away with a huff and grabs onto Izuku's arm again. "Yeah, I'll keep him safe," he grunts, feigning nonchalance. The adults seem pleased, but Izuku tilts his head in thought. "I would have healed them if they asked," he says innocently. Inko shakes her head and takes his hands into hers. "Oh. No, baby, I'm sorry, but you can't just use your quirk on anyone who asks you to, especially not strangers. There are some bad people out there that might want to take you so they can use your quirk." Izuku doesn't look like he quite understands, but wouldn't they not take him if he just heals them? But Kaken scowls and bares his teeth. His grip on Izuku's arm tightens. I won't let that happen. Good. Auntie Mitsuki gives a single, satisfied nod. Thank you, Katsuki-kun, Inko says much more gently. She smiles at him and lightly scratches his hair, but he doesn't push her hand away. Instead, he merely blushes and averts his gaze, pulling Izuku back towards his room. Come on, Izuku, let's go play video games or something, he grumbles. You're staying for dinner, right? Inko startles, suddenly noticing how late it is, and jumps to her feet. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stay so long, I don't mean to impose, I dash. Auntie Mitsuki laughs and wraps an arm around her shoulders. Oh, shut up. You know you're always welcome. Oh, well at least let me help with dinner. Nope. You're gonna sit down and drink a big glass of wine and get this tension out of your shoulders. As Inko continues to babble, Uncle Masaru follows the two women into the kitchen, shaking his head with a soft smile on his face. Kaken rolls his eyes and pushes Izuku into his room. Ugh, grown-ups? Katsuki isn't really sure how to feel about all this. Zuku's new quirk is weird. It's weird it manifested so late, it's weird that it's so different from his parents' quirks, and it's weird that it's a healing quirk of all things. Katsuki doesn't like surprises, and he most certainly did not appreciate this one either. He thought Zuku would get one of his parents' quirks like everyone else. He thought he'd manifest his mother's weak but telekinetic quirk or maybe his father's fire-breathing quirk. Something weak compared to his explosion quirk, but something that could at least provide some entertainment for them. Playing with a healing quirk might be a bit strong though, and it doesn't seem like it'd be very fun anyway. The grown-ups are being so weird about Zuku's quirk too, making it seem like it's so special, and that annoys Katsuki, but it seems to scare Auntie Inko. Even as a 5-year-old, Katsuki could see the genuine fear in her eyes as she told her son why he couldn't use his quirk on strangers. Katsuki likes Auntie Inko. She's pretty and kind, all smooth curves and round softness, so different from his own mother's roughness and harsh edges. Her hugs are the only ones that Katsuki never pushes away because they feel like being wrapped in a warm blanket fresh from the laundry, and she has doe-like eyes that crinkle when she smiles. Zuku has those eyes too, along with all of his mother's softness. He's timid and gentle and cries easily and so unlike Katsuki in so many ways, but maybe that's what makes him the best playmate, not that he would ever admit it. He's always the first one to run up to a dog in the street and pet it, and he's always the first to run away from something fun and dangerous instead of towards it. He's small and weak, and so Katsuki supposes, if he thinks about it, that perhaps this new quirk is actually quite fitting for him then. It's not flashy or strong, and neither is he. Honestly, Katsuki can't even imagine someone as meek as Zuku with anything better than some lame healing quirk. Figures he'd need someone as strong as Katsuki to keep him safe. It makes sense. A feeling of importance fills Katsuki's eye, and his gaze roams over Zuku as the smaller boy kneels beside their hero toys scattered on the ground. Even though Zuku's new quirk isn't nearly as cool as his, Katsuki can at least see its usefulness. Overusing his quirk always makes his wrists ache terribly, but Zuku made the pain go away almost as soon as he touched him. And even though he still stands by what he said earlier, he'll be so strong, he'll never get hurt, he sure as hell isn't going to let some other hero snatch up Zuku. His mother said that every hero needs a healer, and Katsuki was Zuku's friend first, so Zuku is his healer. He'll beat up anyone hero or bad guy that tries to take him for his quirk. Kaken, are we going to play? Zuku turns and asks, blinking at him with his large, innocent eyes. Katsuki jerks out of his thoughts. Of course we are, nerd. He snaps roughly, making Zuku startle. He steps over to him. Maybe this won't be such a bad thing, Zuku's new quirk. Being Zuku's protector. It'll make Auntie Inko happy, he'll get to have Zuku as his healer, and he gets to be the hero in all this. As he plops down next to Zuku, the smaller boy wordlessly hands him the All Might toy with a bright smile. Katsuki feels something in his safety stir and he takes it. Yeah, he'll protect him all right. The next day at school, Izuku does something he's wanted to do for ages. He shows off his quirk. Tsubasa and Inaba are more than willing to help. Tsubasa somehow got a scrape on his knee after Kaken and Izuku left yesterday, so he bounces up to Izuku as soon as he arrives at school and shows him. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd say the winged boy almost seemed proud of his scrape. So, once they've gathered the attention of all of their classmates and a couple of their teachers, Izuku reaches out to heal his scrape. He's nervous at first, almost worried that the previous day had been a dream and he didn't really have a quirk, but like before his quirk seems to activate the second he touches the injury. His peers watch with awe-filled eyes as it fades away into unblemished skin within seconds. Wow! One girl exclaims, "That's so cool, Midoriya-kun. Definitely worth the wait." Another laughs. "Oh geez, what a godsend that quirk is." One of the teachers whines good-naturedly, "These kids are always roughhousing and getting hurt." Izuku beams at the praise. Next to him, Kaken puffs up his tea with pride. "And guess what?" he declares, "when I'm a hero, Zuku's gonna be my healer." More oohing and ahhing from the crowd of children. One of the teachers looks amused. "A hero healer, huh?" She says, "Well, you've certainly got the quirk for it. How did you say it works again?" Izuku explains his theory of energy transfer and she hums contemplatively, "I've never heard of a quirk like this before. And I bet it will only get stronger as you get older." She winks and pats his curls. "It's always good to see young people with healing quirks. Lord knows there's not enough of them." Dr. Tsubasa-san said it's 'cause healing quirks aren't hereditary. Hereditary? His teacher asks and he nods. The other teacher raises his eyebrows. "Really? I didn't know that." Izuku opens his mouth to say more, but Kaken drags him back to the group of kids before he can. They swarm around him, asking him questions about his quirk and how it feels and why it was so late. Izuku answers as best as he can, but soon Kaken starts to fidget impatiently beside him. After a few more minutes, he clearly gets bored that the attention isn't on him and shoos the other kids away. Izuku doesn't mind too much though. All of this attention is new and overwhelming. He's used to just fading into the background and staying by Kaken's side. Thankfully, the rest of the school day goes by fairly normally, aside from a couple of kids coming up to him during lunch asking him to heal their scrapes and bruises. Then he briefly gains another small audience while he uses his quirk. He doesn't really know how to respond to praise other than awkwardly smiling and scratching the back of his head, so he doesn't linger very long and the group usually disperses soon after. Kaken can't seem to decide whether he wants to boast about having Izuku as his healer or be grumpy that the attention isn't on him anymore. Inaba tries to reassure him. "Don't worry, it's just 'cause it's a new quirk. I'm sure the hype will die down after a couple of days." Kaken merely grumbles inaudibly but Izuku lets out a sigh of relief. "I hope so," he says exasperatedly. "I don't know if I like all this attention. I feel so awkward." Kaken snorts but seems appeased by his response. At the end of the day, the four of them walk home together, Tsubasa and Inaba splitting off a couple of streets before theirs. Kaken insists on walking Izuku to his door, which is a bit strange and unnecessary, but Izuku doesn't protest much. When his mother comes back from home soon after, she seems extremely relieved when she sees him, but her expression smooths out a moment later and she announces she's making katsudon for dinner. The prospect of his favorite dish erases immediately takes Izuku's mind off of any oddities he may have perceived, and he later chatters happily to his mother about his first day at school with a quirk as they eat dinner. Before going to bed, he decides to take out a new notebook and start researching everything he can about hero healers. Just like with his hero notebooks, he begins filling pages with information about individual healers, although he quickly discovers that there's a lot more information about Recovery Girl available than there is for any other healer. His eyes roam over article after article about the healer traveling to other countries to heal people, to heal heroes, to save people that others couldn't save in ways that no one else could. By the time Inko peeks into his room, Izuku is fast asleep in front of his computer with Recovery Girl's biography displayed on the monitor screen. She ends up carrying him to bed, and from that night on, Izuku's admiration for Recovery Girl only continues to grow. The second day of school goes just about the same as the first, but the third day is a bit more interesting. It seems that word has spread all over the school about Izuku's quirk. He finds himself being approached not only by classmates but by upperclassmen too, asking him to heal paper cuts and bruises and even a twisted ankle. Izuku happily obliges, But as the weeks go by, more and more students approach him with their injuries. He never realized how many scrapes and bruises children got until he was faced with them. They're usually the same students too, ones that like to roughhouse or play sports. Kaken's mood steadily sours as the number of kids to approach Izuku rises. He tries to tell the students to SCK it up, especially with those with smaller injuries, but Izuku can't find it within himself to turn someone away when they're asking for help. This results in him sometimes going home extremely tired from using his quirk so much. Kaken always yells at him when this happens, but Izuku takes it as a learning opportunity. His quirk is called Healing Energy. That's what they decide when Inko takes him to get it registered. The next day he asks his mother for a new notebook and begins filling it with notes about his own quirk, rather than those of heroes. At school there are plenty of opportunities for him to practice with his quirk, so he learns a few things as time passes. The first thing he discovers is that his quirk doesn't work at all if he's injured or sick. A week after his quirk manifests, he accidentally trips down the stairs and twists his ankle. He doesn't think too much of it until he discovers that he can't use his quirk when someone asks him to at lunch. He panics, wondering what happened, and it only clicks in his mind the day after when his ankle is feeling better that it probably had something to do with that. To test this, he has Tsubasa punch him in the arm, much to Kaken's displeasure, and tries to heal a scrape, to no avail. So there's that. The second thing he discovers is that skin-to-skin contact is needed to heal. This he does not discover by accident but because he is genuinely curious. He supposes it should have been a bit obvious. The third thing he learns about his quirk is that it works best when he's well-fed and well-rested. This kind of relates to the whole "it won't work if he's injured or sick," except it's just something he notices over time. Like if he doesn't sleep so well the previous night or skips breakfast before school, then his quirk is more sluggish and he tires out a lot faster. The fourth thing he discovers is that he cannot do anything to help illnesses. He tries futilely to pour his energy into Tsubasa when the winged boy gets a cold during the winter, to no avail. Kaken eventually drags him away to prevent him from getting sick. The fifth thing he learns is that when he heals someone, he brings them to their absolute best. He discovers this with Kaken one day during winter break. They're off in the forest again, just the two of them this time, and Kaken is trying to push the outer limits of his quirk and make bigger explosions. Whenever he overuses his quirk, Izuku heals him and he seems to be extra energized afterwards, making even bigger explosions than before. Izuku wonders if he has an effect on other people's quirks, but he figures that if he brings them to their full health then it's only natural that their quirks would be working at their best. He can also sort of sense injuries too, which he knew about with the bird's dislocated wing, but it's especially helpful during the first few weeks after his quirk manifests. Kaken isn't too good at asking for help, even when he knows Izuku can provide it, so sometimes he'll lean against his friend's side and feel with his quirk if he has any injuries, and with a rowdy boy like Kaken there's almost always some sort of injury. But Kaken doesn't like to bring it up, so Izuku will just grab his hand as they walk home and let his energy flow. Kaken never comments on the sudden energy he feels and instead ruffles Izuku's curls into a rat's nest, much to the greenette's displeasure. Just when he thinks he's learned all he can about his quirk, he discovers something new. It's exciting and quickly comes to love his new power, scribbling down everything he learns into his quirk notebook. He doesn't even mind too much when he goes home tired from healing because it's evidence of his strong work. Inko, however, does mind. "Please, Izuku, you need to learn how to say no," she says one night during dinner. "I know you want to help everyone, but it's not good for you to be draining yourself so often. You need energy too." Izuku shoves some rice into his mouth. He always seems to be hungry after a long day of healing, and protests, but it's good quirk practice. Besides, Kaken always uses his quirk. Like every day. "Izuku," Inko says with a firm tone, so Izuku sighs in defeat. Ugh. The next day after school, Izuku is waiting just outside the main building, watching kids as they walk home or get picked up by their parents. Kaken got detention for getting in a fight with another student, which isn't uncommon even though Izuku has made his disapproval very clear, so he has to wait for him to be done. Kaken had insisted that he wait for him, even though Tsubasa and Inaba offered to walk him home, but whatever. He should be done soon. "Oi, Midoriya-kun." The boy glances up to see a couple of fourth graders approaching him. He recognizes them, Akamine and Furuya. They treat Izuku well enough, but from what he's heard they're a couple of troublemakers. They always come to him with their scrapes and bruises from whatever tussle they got into. Normally, he'd heal them without any complaint, but after what his mother told him, "Hey, I've got a couple of scrapes, you mind healing them?" Akamine asks as soon as they reach him. "Sorry, not today guys," Izuku says apologetically. Akamine looks briefly surprised. Come on, they sting a lot and they're really nasty," he whines. "Look." He pulls up his sleeve to reveal scrapes and bruises that do look a bit uncomfortable, but are really not that bad. They'd heal in a week on their own. "Yeah, and I got punched in the face," Furuya states bluntly, turning his head to show Izuku the bruise blooming on his cheek. The boy sighs, not even bothering to ask how he got it. "I'm sorry guys, but I've kind of been using my quirk a lot for the past few days and I'm trying to take a break," he explains patiently. "Yeah, but this won't take that much energy," Akamine insists. "Come on, man, do us a favor." Izuku shrinks under the pressure, but a ball of irritation forms in his eye. It's his quirk, he shouldn't be pressured to use it if he doesn't want to. "Actually, I do you guys a lot of favors," he says, slowly backing away from them, "pretty much every week, really. So I think this one time you can dash." Furuya suddenly reaches out and grabs his upper arm, pulling him back over to them. He grins down at him, but it doesn't look friendly at all. Izuku suddenly notices how tall these older boys are, how much bigger they are than him. Even amongst boys his own age, Izuku is pretty short, so these guys practically loom over him. He gulps. Come on Midoriya-kun." Furuya sneers, "Don't be like that." He grabs Izuku's hand and puts it on his bruised cheek. To Izuku's dismay, he feels his energy begin to leave him through his fingertips and he struggles to pull away. Another thing he's noticed about his quirk is that it automatically activates when he touches an injury. He hardly ever has to think about turning it on, but it's only now that he realizes he has no idea how to turn it off. He panics when Furuya refuses to let go of his hand and Akamine starts reaching for his other arm. "Hey, stop it." He snaps, "I said no. I said no. You want to be a healer, don't you?" Akamine jeers, grabbing his forearm and pulling him closer. What kind of healer refuses to heal? He starts to bring Izuku's hand towards his bruised arm, but no matter how strong Izuku pulls, he can't break out of his grip. "Stop it." He cries out, his eyes welling with tears, "Let me go. Leave me alone." He yelps as Furuya squeezes his arms strong and he thrashes futilely, panic making his heart beat rapid. The two boys are so much stronger than him, he's never felt so helpless before. He hates it, he feels like he's going to be sick, he doesn't understand why they're doing this because he said no. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Izuku nearly cries with relief at the sound of Kaken's voice. Akamine and Furuya both pause as they look up at the blonde boy rushing out the building towards them. Izuku has never seen his friend look so angry, but the two upperclassmen don't seem intimidated. "You fuckers!" Kaken shrieks, "Get your hands off him." Izuku tries to pull away again, but Furuya doesn't let up. "Or what?" He laughs. Akamine snickers, "Yeah, what are you gonna do about it, first grader?" In response, Kaken lets out a battle cry and crashes into them with explosions dancing on his palms. As soon as their grip on him is broken, Izuku turns around and flees. His heartbeat is pounding in his ears, but he can still hear the cacophony of explosions and yells behind him. For a second he feels a flash of worry for his friend, but he knows that he would only get in the way if he went to go help him. So, he takes cover behind the nearest tree and waits for it to be over. For all their talk, Akamine and Furuya don't last long in this fight. "Oi oi, get off me, you're freaking crazy!" Akamine shrieks. There's the sound of scuffling feet and Izuku hesitantly peeks out from behind the tree. Kaken stands with his back to him, facing down Akamine and Furuya who are covered in multiple burns and bruises. They stare at the blonde with wide eyes that are somehow both angry and terrified at the same time. "We're gonna tell Yo-san." Furuya snaps, "You'll pay for this tomorrow." Kaken merely raises his fist threateningly in response. The upperclassmen both tense up before gritting their teeth and fleeing. "You're gonna regret this." Furuya shrieks before he disappears. There's a moment of silence. Then, Kaken wipes his nose on his arm and turns around, clearly looking for Izuku. Tears blur his vision as Izuku jumps out of his hiding spot and runs over to him. Kaken! He cries out, "Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, oof." He collides with Kaken and wraps him into a tight hug. He's too busy sobbing into his friend's shoulder to realize that his quirk isn't naturally responding to the cuts and bruises that litter his skin. I was so scared. He hiccups, that they kept pulling on me and enforcing me to use my quirk even though I told them no. Hey, what are you even saying? Kaken growls without heat, pushing him off. I can barely hear you when you're dash. He pauses, staring down at Izuku's forearms. Izuku looks down too and sees that his sleeves have pushed up slightly, revealing angry red bruises forming from where Furuya and Akamine grabbed him. Oh, Izuku sniffles, trying to wipe away his tears. Kaken is eerily still for a few moments, then almost quite literally explodes. I'll kill them. He screeches, whirling around as if to look for the two older boys. Kaken! Izuku yelps, pulling him back. It's fine, it doesn't hurt that bad. Although, I don't think I can really heal you. He takes Kaken's hand in his and tries to pour his energy, but nothing happens. Kaken's eye twitches. Izuku lets his head hang. I'm sorry. What are you effing apologizing for? Kaken snaps. I'm the one who's supposed to dash. He cuts himself off, his teeth grinding audibly as he glares at the ground. They're both quiet for a few moments, Kaken silently seething while Izuku tries to get his tears under control. He sees the other boy glancing at his bruises and is surprised to find not only anger in his eyes but guilt. Izuku blinks. Ooh, you were really cool back there, Kaken, he says softly. I can't believe you took on 2 fourth graders in one. Kaken straightens up and lifts his chin. The best hero always wins. No matter what, they always come out on top. Despite his words, his voice lacks the usual enthusiasm it usually has when he says something like that. Izuku sniffles once more before smiling. You're already my hero. Kaken's eyes widen slightly and Izuku lets out a wet chuckle. You are. You saved me, didn't you? Kaken stares at him for a few moments before his lip twitches up into a half grin. Yeah, I did. I saved you. Izuku smiles back at him and the boy full-on grins, puffing his eyes up. Well, come on then, Izuku. Let's get going. Helplessness is a feeling that Izuku soon grows to hate. Inko panics when she finds out what happened later that day. She puts ice packs on Izuku and Kaken's bruises and then calls the school. Surprisingly, Kaken doesn't get in trouble for fighting again. The administration is extremely apologetic, although a part of Izuku wonders if they would have been as concerned if he were another student. He knows most of the teachers tend to like him since he's polite, doesn't cause trouble, and helps prevent kids from going home with whatever minor injuries they acquired that day. Furuya and Akamine get a harsh scolding and are suspended for a couple of days. Still, that incident remains fresh in his mind for the next couple of weeks. He stays a bit closer to Kaken than before and even Tsubasa and Inaba become more protective. He still heals people once his bruises are gone, but he learns to limit himself and say no to smaller injuries like paper cuts. Most people are understanding, but Kaken is quick to chase off anyone who's persistent. He almost looks like he enjoys it too, but Izuku tries not to pay too much attention to that. Things are fine for a while. They all start to relax more as time passes. Kaken and Izuku still basically spend all day together, but they're not as attached to the hip anymore. Like now, for example. They're back in the forest once more with Tsubasa and Inaba. Kaken has just turned 7 and decides that he wants to claim the entire forest as his territory. They usually only go a little ways in, but Kaken knocks down the perimeter fence with an explosion and leads the way. So now they're exploring deeper than they've ever gone before. Izuku is trailing a few feet behind the others, glancing around at the scenery. He's a little nervous, if only because they might get in trouble if they're caught, but he finds the trees and plants to be very pretty. It's the beginning of May, so everything is in full bloom. Hey, check out that river. Kaken shouts, pointing at a shallow creek with a fallen log over it. Let's go cross it. Yeah. Tsubasa and Inaba cheer. Izuku just smiles and trails after them. The log is a bit slippery from moss, but is large enough for the boys to cross confidently. Kaken's high-pitched voice echoes amongst the trees as he chants some song he's made up for his future hero agency, fearlessly leading his posse across the log. It's amusing until the blonde's foot slips and he falls off the log into the river. Kaken! Izuku cries, already scrambling off the log and making his way down the riverbank. Hey, are you okay, man? Inaba calls down. As soon as Izuku steps into the river, Kaken reemerges from the water and shakes his head. He looks unharmed, but Izuku still worries. Are you alright, Kaken? He asks, finally reaching him. Don't worry, Midoriya-kun. Tsubasa says, you know Bakugo-kun. He's tough. Izuku grabs onto Kaken's hands and starts feeling for injuries with his quirk, but the blonde rolls his eyes and pushes him away. I'm fine, relax. He complains, you think I'm gonna get hurt from falling into a little river? The greenette pouts, you could have hit your head. Come on guys, get back up here. Inaba says. Sure. As Kaken starts back towards the shore, clearly intending to cross the log once more, Izuku pauses, tilting his head. He heard something just then. It sounded like a meow, but what would a cat be doing in the middle of a forest? He's about to brush it off, but then he hears it again. This time, he looks around and pinpoints the source of the sound. Zuku, come on, hurry up. Kaken calls out. He's already climbing back up the shore. The cat meows again. It sounds distressed. Izuku's heart clenches and he knows he has to do something about it. So, he turns away from Kaken and begins climbing up the opposite shore. Hey, where are you going? His friend questions. Zuku-te, stop. Wait up. He starts wading back through the river, but Izuku doesn't wait for him. He's already at the top of the slope. Come back here. I heard something, Izuku replies. I want to check it out. Wait up. Hey, I said wait for me. Midoriya-kun, what's up? Tsubasa and Inaba reach him first since they were already halfway through the log, but Kaken is catching up. He looks irritated and stomps over to him, dripping wet. Before he can start yelling, Izuku says, I think I heard a cat. A cat? Inaba raises a brow. It sounded like it was in trouble. Izuku points to the direction where the sound came from. I think it's coming from there. I want to check it out. Kaken scowls. Idiot. What the hell would a cat be doing here? Oh, hey, there is something there. Tsubasa says. The four of them look over to see where he's pointing. A flash of silver peeks out from the distant shrubbery. Tsubasa and Inaba glance at Kaken, but Izuku is already making his way over. Kaken growls and trots after him. As they get closer, they realize that the flash of silver is really a wired fence. It looks old and is full of cobwebs, but that's nothing compared to what's on the other side. It's strange, seeing a place so barren and devoid of life in the middle of the blooming forest. The ground is dry and dusty and there's only a few scraggly-looking trees. In the middle of the large yard is a rickety old shed, looking as if no one had been in it for years. What the hell is this place? Kaken frowns. Do you think anyone lives here? Inaba asks, I think I can see a house over in that shadowy area, but it looks old. It's kind of creepy, Tsubasa admits. As he says that, Izuku hears the same meow once more. It's a lot louder now and it seems like it's coming from the shed. He perks up. Did you hear that? He asks excitedly, that was the cat. It's here. I didn't hear anything. Me neither. But it's here, he insists, pressing his face closer to the fence. I think it's coming from that shed. The other boys are silent, sharing dubious glances between them. Then Kaken scoffs and turns around. Whatever, this is lame. Let's keep exploring. Yeah, Inaba agrees, following him. What? Izuku asks, dismayed. His friends are already walking away. But we have to save it. Kaken is starting to get irritated again. There's no cat there, Izuku. Now, come on. Tsubasa glances back to where he's still standing and gives him a pitying look. If someone does live there, we could get in trouble for being on their property, he points out. Let's not cut our adventure short. Izuku watches them walk away, his anxiety growing with every step they take. He glances to and fro, wondering what to do. He's not crazy, he did hear. Cat. He knows it's in that dirty old shed, he just knows it. Why didn't they hear it too? Why don't they believe him? The boy looks back at the strange yard and frowns. The shed doesn't look that far away. And he wouldn't be cutting their adventure short, not if he's fast. Just a few seconds in and out, that's all he needs. There's a weak spot on the side of the fence too. He hesitates. The cat meows again, weaker this time, and his mind is made for him. Hey Zuku. You coming or wadash? Kakin hears metal clanging and glances over his shoulder just in time to see Izuku slipping through a weak spot in the fence. Zuku. He shrieks, spinning around and running back. What the hell are you doing? Tsubasa and Inaba panic too and run after him. He slams into the fence and tries to force his way through the same spot Izuku got through, but he's bigger than the other boy and it's not as easy for him to slip through. Zuku. Midoriya-kun, come back. Is he crazy? Meanwhile, Izuku is still dashing across the yard as fast as he can. He can hear his friends yelling behind him, but for once he doesn't care. He's almost halfway to the shed when a sudden volley of deep barks stops him in his tracks. He looks up to see a large dog charging across the yard towards him, snarling furiously. It must have been snoozing in the shadows of one of the trees because Izuku is certain he otherwise would have seen it. The dog is massive and is charging right at him and it looks really mad and oh god, what does he do? What does he do? He can hear his friends telling him to run, but he can't help it. He freezes in fear, staring with wide eyes at the snarling dog. Panic rises in his psyche and he finds his mind thinking back to the incident with the two upperclassmen, the horrible feeling of helplessness returning with a vengeance. What was he thinking? He's not like Kakin or Tsubasa or even Inaba, he can't defend himself. He can't even run away. What was he thinking running in here like that? The dog is only a few feet away from him before he manages to react, and even then he only has time to stumble back a couple of steps before the dog is upon him. Teeth flash before his eyes and he screams. Suddenly, the dog lets out a yelp just as two hands wrap around Izuku's arms and he's lifted into the air. Wings flap on either side of him and he gasps, looking down to see Kakin aiming his explosions at the dog. He snarls even more ferociously than the mutt and keeps swiping at him, making the biggest explosions Izuku has ever seen him make. The dog flinches and whirls around, quickly running away with its tail between its legs. Kakin's explosions don't stop until the dog disappears back to where it came from, and only then does he relax. Tsubasa returns a shaky Izuku back to the ground as Inaba catches up. Midoriya-kun, are you okay? He asks worriedly, putting a hand on Izuku's shoulder to steady him when he wobbles. That dog almost got you. Izuku struggles to catch his breath as he trembles uncontrollably. The overwhelming relief has him feeling faint, as if he just healed a bunch of people all at once, but he swallows strong and nods. I am okay, he gasps. I just dash. His words are cut off when Kakin suddenly stomps over to him and gives him a strong smack on the back of his head. He yelps, more out of shock than pain, and stares at his friend with wide eyes. Hey! Tsubasa yells, but Kakin ignores him, his red, furious eyes locked on Izuku's. What the F were you thinking? He roars, grabbing the front of Izuku's shirt and pulling him close so he can snarl in his face. What the hell is wrong with you? Do you have a FING death wish? You listen to me, idiot. If I tell you not to go somewhere, don't go there. And if I tell you to run, you run. Never freeze like that. Do you hear me? He roughly shakes Izuku, who cries out and nods rapidly. What if that dog had gotten to you before I did? You can't even throw a punch, you would have died, Izuku. And I dash. The blonde cuts himself off, struggling to find his words as he sees. You effing. F you. Before Izuku knows it, Kakin has his arms wrapped tightly around him and is growling obscenities into his hair. Stupid idiot, son. You little dash. Izuku blinks in surprise, the fear dying down a bit. Kakin is hardly ever the one to initiate hugs. It's a bit uncomfortable, he's squeezing a bit too strong and Izuku's chin is trapped against his shoulder, but he can feel just how fast his friend's heart is beating against his teeth. His eyes widen slightly. He scared him. He scared Kakin. He almost doesn't believe it at first. He never thought Kakin could be afraid of anything. But the evidence is here. In the heartbeat he can feel thumping against his ihi, in the arms wrapped tightly around him as if they'll never let go. Izuku nearly cried after the dog almost attacked him, but now his eyes are watering for an entirely different reason. Kaken, he croaks, his voice muffled against the boy's shoulder. I'm sore dash. Hey, guys, Tsubasa interrupts nervously. If there's a dog here then that probably means there's people too. We should go. Kaken pulls away and wipes his nose with a sniffle, but before he can say anything a high and very audible meow reaches their ears. Izuku freezes. He'd completely forgotten about the cat. Inaba perks up. Oh, I heard that. Me too, Tsubasa says a bit uneasily. His eyes glance towards the house in the distance. Kaken meets Izuku's gaze and he must have a pleading look on his face because the blonde grits his teeth before letting out a huff. Well, we've come this FNG far, he bites out. Then, he fixes Izuku with a strong glare and leans close. But you better listen to me this time. I'm going first and you're gonna stay behind me. Izuku swallows, but he's not going to argue with Kaken when he has an expression like that on his face, so he simply nods. Kaken turns and leads the way as the four boys hurry the rest of the way to the shed. The blonde cautiously opens the door before peeking his head inside. Izuku and the others wait with bated breath, watching him anxiously, but then he steps inside and waves for them to follow. Tsubasa goes first and Inaba brings up the rear, keeping Izuku between them. The inside of the shed is even more ragged and dirty than the outside. A heavy layer of dust covers everything and lingers in the air, causing Tsubasa to sneeze. Well? Kaken asks, where's the cat? I dunno. Izuku frowns, glancing around, then begins calling out, Kitty? Kitty, where are you? Idiot, it's not gonna come just because you dash. Marrow? Of course. Inaba snickers at Kaken's deadpan expression, but the explosive boy just shoulders him roughly before moving towards the source of the noise. Izuku follows at his heels and peeks over his shoulder when he stops in front of a dusty, broken table. Kaken squats down and Izuku does the same, his eyes landing on a lump of fur leaning against the wall. He gasps, but it turns into a coughing fit when the dusty air hits his lungs. Kaken rolls his eyes at him as the other two boys join them. It's a kitten, Kaken says, I think. Are you sure? Inaba asks skeptically, it kind of just looks like a giant, furry dash. The lump of fur lets out a loud meow. Oh nope, never mind, that's a cat. Kaken snickers and Tsubasa puts a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Hey, you were right, Midoriya-kun. Good job. Don't encourage him, Kaken snaps, it was. Still the stupidest thing he's ever done. Once his coughing is under control, Izuku starts crawling underneath the table. As he gets closer, two pale yellow eyes appear from the mass of fur and stare at him. Even though the kitten is fairly small, Izuku still finds himself intimidated by that gaze. Be careful, Midoriya-kun, Inaba says, it might be mean. Izuku cautiously reaches out with a hand to let the kitten sniff him. It does, and the boy smiles when its whiskers tickle his fingers. He gets the feeling that the kitten isn't too impressed with him, but he takes the chance and gently touches its belly, brushing aside its long fur. He immediately gasps. He's hurt, Izuku says, then frowns down at the wound. It looks like it got bitten by something. Inaba tilts his head. Hey, maybe it's that dog? Maybe it chased the cat into here and trapped it? Maybe, but let's hurry up, Kaken says. I don't want to risk getting caught by whoever owns that dog. Izuku nods and turns back to the kitten, pressing his fingers to its skin and letting his energy flow. The dog bite is the most serious wound he's ever healed, but it isn't very big since it's on a cat, so it doesn't take too much energy to heal. The kitten relaxes beneath his fingers and blinks up at him, letting out a curious meow. Come on out, little kitten, he coos. Don't worry, we're nice. We're gonna take you somewhere safe. The kitten continues to stare at him, not making any move to get up. Thankfully, he doesn't make much of a fuss when Izuku just picks him up, tucking him into his arms as he clambers out from underneath the table. Oh my gosh, he whispers, he's so cute. It's dirty. Kaken wrinkles his nose. Well, yeah, 'cause he's been living in here for who knows how long, Izuku says, readjusting his grip. Let's get him out of here. The four turn to leave, but freeze when they hear paw steps right outside the shed. The dog is back, snuffling at the door and bumping it with its head. Izuku tenses up, but Kaken strides forward and yanks the door open, snarling as he lets out a bunch of explosions. The dog immediately yelps and runs away again, and Kaken puffs up his tea, looking smug. Come on then. They make sure the coast is clear before running back over to the fence. Turns out Kaken had blown a bigger hole in it in order to get through, so they slip through it easily and make their way back to familiar territory. They stop by the river to wash some of the dirt off the kitten, and to their surprise he actually seems to appreciate it. Hey, he is kind of cute, I guess, Inaba admits, scratching behind the kitten's ear gently. The feline sneezes on him in return. He's adorable. Izuku squeals, I want to keep him. Kaken rolls his eyes. Izuku uses his shirt to dry off the kitten, and now that he's clean the boy can see that his long fur is a mottled mix of blacks and grays, with more of the latter covering his neck and his teeth. His paws are pretty big too, which makes Izuku wonder what breed he is. They continue trekking through the forest, the kitten sitting comfortably in Izuku's arms, and by the time they reach their neighborhood the sun is starting to set. Inko must be wondering where he is, so he and Kaken bid goodbye to Tsubasa and Inaba before heading over to his place. The soft scraping of their feet against the sidewalk is the only sound that fills the air as they walk beside each other. Izuku casts a sideways glance at Kaken. The blonde's hands are shoved deep in his pockets, jaw set and shoulders hunched as he glowers at the sidewalk beneath his feet. Somehow Izuku can tell that the scowl on his face right now is different than his normal one. Hey, Kaken. Kaken grunts. Maybe let's not tell Mom about the thing with the dog? Izuku suggests sheepishly. Kaken lifts his head to glare at him silently for a moment. Then he grumbles, only 'cause I'm too tired to deal with her freaking out right now. Izuku lets out a sigh of relief, but his friend's not done. But don't you ever do something that stupid ever again. He snaps. I won't, Izuku promises. I mean it, Kaken warns, that? You. He lets out a frustrated growl and practically spits out, he scared the shit out of me back there, dumb. I don't know if you've realized, but you might as well be quirkless when it comes to fighting. So you leave that sheet to me, alright? He huffs and turns away sharply, as if to end the conversation, but something stops Izuku from letting him do so. A flicker of irritation and frustration blooms in his eye and he can't help himself from snapping, I'm not helpless. His voice is loud, surprising both him and Kaken, who stops and turns to face him. Izuku clenches his jaw and readjusts his hold on the kitten. I'm not helpless, he repeats, quieter this time. I hate that feeling. I don't want to be helpless. But be back with Furia-san and Akam. His eyes prick and he squeezes them shut as Kaken stares at him. They were just so much stronger than me and they kept grabbing me and I hated it and I hated that I couldn't do anything to stop it and now this thing with the dog. The kitten in his arms shifts and rubs his face against Izuku's as he clearly becomes more and more distressed. He struggles to find his words. I just always thought I'd get a quirk like Mom or Dad's, you know? Something I could become a hero with, something I could be strong with. And what I have now is great, but he sniffles and rubs his eyes on his sleeve, although there's no point in trying to stop the tears from flowing. Head drooping, he mumbles miserably, Kaken, I love my quirk, but I just wish it wasn't so useless. His tears drip into the kitten's fur as he sniffles pitifully. Kaken is silent for a moment. Then, that's effing bullshit, Zuku. Izuku looks up in surprise, his vision blurry from tears. Ha! He croaks. Kaken's jaw clenches and his nostrils flare as he huffs. I said that's effing bullshit. He snaps, your quirk isn't effing useless and you know it. It's effing cool, alright? And rare as shit. You healed a dog bite in like 2 seconds. Yeah, it might be kind of useless in a fight, but that's why you've got me. I'll gladly kick anyone's butt for you, just name M. Izuku chuckles wetly and wipes his eyes on his shoulder sleeve. That's probably the nicest thing Kaken has ever said about his quirk, even though he sounded set off the entire time. He smiles sadly at his friend and says, I know I can rely on you, Kaken. Of course I know that. I just wish I could rely on myself too, you know? I mean, don't tell me it doesn't get annoying following me around all the time. Well, too effing bad, 'cause I'm telling you that, Kaken growls. Trust me, I'd much rather hang out with you than those demon extras that keep tagging along with us. Kaken. He scolds lightly. Kaken snorts and gives him a contemplative look. Sniffing, he glances away and feigns nonchalance. As for relying on yourself, well, I suppose I can show you some moves. Izuku frowns. Moves? Yeah, you know. The blonde gestures vaguely with his hand. Teach you how to fight. I don't want my future healer to be completely useless in a battle. He arches a brow and gives him a sharp look. Not that you will be fighting, but just in case. Izuku stares at him for a few seconds as the words process, then tilts his head. Kaken, do you even know how to fight? Kaken glares. I mean like, without your quirk, Izuku stammers. Professionally, you know? Who cares if it's professional? What only matters is that it works, Kaken snorts. So it's decided. Izuku blinks. We'll start tomorrow after school. Without another word, Kaken turns around and continues walking down the street. Kamitsuzu. I can't wait to see Auntie's face when you bring home that flea bag. Izuku glances down at the kitten, who is gazing after Kaken rather judgmentally. He sighs and follows, wondering just what he got himself into. As he leads the way back towards Zuku's house, Katsuki hears his friend continue walking behind him. There's a brief shifting of fabric and then a soft coo. He doesn't need to glance over his shoulder to know that Zuka must be fawning over that ugly but cat. That ugly but cat that he almost got his FNG face ripped off for. Katsuki's fists curl. His mind replays the encounter with the dog over and over again. The irritation and anger he'd felt when he'd seen Zuka slip through that fence even though he told him not to, how in a split second it morphed into cold, heart-stopping fear as soon as he'd heard the volley of barks, as soon as he had seen the massive dog charging towards his best friend, his healer, his Zuku. He'd never felt fear like that before. It was such pure, utter terror in its most unadulterated form. Terror because what if he didn't make it in time, what if he wasn't fast enough, what if he wasn't strong enough, Zuku was going to get hurt, Zuku was going to get killed. Like a horse kicked with a spiked heel, the fear had spurred him into action, giving him the strength and speed he needed to cross that field in a matter of seconds. The icy daggers in his heart melted into a burning fury that he'd aimed at the mutt for daring to attack what's his, then at Zuku for being naive enough to do something so infuriatingly moronic in the first place, and now he aims it at himself, glaring at the ground as he quietly seethes. That was by far the stupidest thing Zuku has ever done, but Zuku is stupid and soft and Katsuki knows this because he knows everything about Zuku and he should have known he would have gone after that FING cat. He loves animals, and he hardly ever says no to healing people, and Katsuki was an absolute idiot for thinking his friend would just forget about an animal being potentially hurt just because Katsuki told him to. Although the thought of Zuku ignoring his orders, of not listening to him and nearly getting himself killed for it, leaves a bitter taste in the back of his throat. He grits his teeth. That was way too close. And Zuku is right, of course, even though Katsuki reassured him, his quirk really is FING useless when it comes to fighting, there's no denying that. So of course he can't have a healer that can't fight, that's an easy fix, he can teach him, but he also can't have a healer that won't listen to him, that might prove to be a bit more difficult, depending on just how stupid Zuku is insisting on being, but maybe this incident will scare him straight and he'll think twice before disobeying Katsuki again. Aren't you the cutest little thing? Zuku coos in a sickeningly sweet voice behind him, huh? Aren't you? Irritation claws at his heart and his scowl deepens. But of course it won't be that easy. Because Zuku is timid and gentle and cries easily and so unlike Katsuki in so many ways, but that's alright, because where Zuku is weak, Katsuki will be strong. He can be more than strong enough for both of them. Remnants of the fear still lingers in his eye, however, like the stubborn stench of smoke that refuses the air even after the raging wildfire has long gone. His mind unwittingly flashes back to the incident, clanking metal, quick footsteps, vicious snarls, Zuku's scream and his hands twitch, sparks threatening to pop. His eye feels tight, and he lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It comes out shaky. That causes him to become even more angry with himself. Why the hell is he shaken? It was just a stupid dog and he beat it anyways. What's he so scared about? He did his DMN job and he did it well. He protected Zuko from the dog, just like he protected him from those two upperclassmen assholes because he's the strongest. That mutt didn't even touch him. He blames it on the fact it was such a close call, and that a dog is much more dangerous than two elementary school bullies. Even if he did teach him how to fight, Zuko couldn't have done anything against that thing, not without a combative quirk. He really is so weak, which means that Katsuki needs to be better. Stronger. He can't make a mistake like that again. Zuko hates feeling helpless? Fine. Katsuki can help him gain a little self-confidence. And in the meantime, Katsuki will continue to work to become even stronger, faster, better, to protect him from any form of danger that comes their way. Kaken? Zuko's voice cuts through his thoughts and he abruptly stops. The freckled boy is standing in the middle of the walkway up to his house, gazing at him in confusion. Katsuki had been so lost in his own mind that he had unknowingly started to walk past his house. Zuko tilts his head. Aren't you coming? Katsuki's eyes drop down to the kitten in his arms. Snapping jaws flash in his mind and his heart gives a little jolt. He clenches his fists. And fear? Of course I'm coming. He snaps, marching towards Zuko and roughly shouldering past him. Fear can go F itself. His mother is surprised, to say the least, when he comes home late with a kitten in his arms. He explains that he found him in the forest, not mentioning the dog or the probably illegal trespassing. Inko listens with a look on her face saying, I know where this is going, but smiles when he tells her how he healed the kitten's wounds. Finally, he gets to asking if they can keep him and she hesitates. Please, Mom. He begs, I'm almost 7. I can take care of a cat. I promise I'll feed him and clean his litter box and brush his fur, and he goes on and on about all the things he'll do, and to his delight he sees her expression start to soften. He gives her his best puppy dog eyes and she sighs heavily. There's a moment of silence. Then she admits, he is awfully cute. And Izuku knows that he has won. Kaken is stunned. Then he huffily grumbles, of course. The only thing he tells him before he goes home is to not name it something stupid. So, of course, Izuku decides to name the kitten Sushi, after the dinner he has that night. Kaken thinks it's stupid, but Kaken is a biased party because he never liked the cat to begin with in the first place. And it becomes pretty clear early on that Sushi doesn't like him either. They take Sushi to the vet during the weekend and learn that he's a mix of Maine Cien and some other breed, so he's going to grow pretty big. Izuku thought, based on his current size, that perhaps Sushi was around 4 or 5 months old, but apparently he's only 2 months. Inko's eyes widen when she hears this, and she suddenly looks rather apprehensive. Thankfully, though, Sushi settles into their life fairly easily. He's fun to play with and the Midoriyas are more than happy to spoil him. He enjoys laying on Izuku's desk while he does homework and claws at his pencil when he decides he needs a break. He gets along with Inko well enough, but it's clear that Izuku is his favorite. Not that the boy is complaining. But man, it's almost comical how much Sushi hates Kaken. He doesn't puff up. His fur and hiss. No, he's much more elegant than that. Whenever the blonde comes over, Sushi will plop himself right in Izuku's lap and just glare at him judgmentally. And it is glaring, there's no other way to describe it. Inko thinks it hilarious how expressive the cat is. He can communicate exactly what he's thinking just by looking at you. And he's never thinking anything good about Kaken, but the feeling is mutual. Izuku nearly sees himself laughing when he walks into his room one day to find Kaken and Sushi having a glaring contest. You think you're effing better than me, huh? Kaken growls, thinks staring at me will freak me out? You're just a stupid-looking furball that batted your eyes into a new family, but I've known Zuko for a hell of a lot longer than you have, so back off, fleabag. Behind him, Izuku is silently wheezing with laughter. He tries not to draw attention to himself, but he can't help the snort that escapes him. Kaken whirls around with wide eyes and Izuku just loses it. He bursts out with laughter as Kaken sputters indignantly and shrieks, How long have you been there? Izuku's laughing so strong he can't even breathe, let alone respond. His laughter angers Kaken even more. Oh, peace off. He screeches, that cat's got an attitude and you know it. F knows why you keep him around. From the other room, Inko gently scolds Kaken for cursing. Despite his mirth, Izuku notices the blush on his friend's cheeks and tries to control his laughter, but he ends up just wheezing even harder. It doesn't help that Sushi is still sitting regally on his dresser, giving Kaken a smug look. Eventually, Kaken just grabs Izuku and drags him outside for another fighting lesson, which Izuku soon learns is really just an excuse to beat him up. Kaken has been staying true to his word and makes them train nearly every day after school, although Izuku isn't sure if train is the right word. Just as he expected, Kaken doesn't really know much about actual fighting, just about roughhousing. He never really hurts Izuku, but he's a rowdy boy and he's got the muscles and dirty moves to prove it. The first couple of lessons are okay, but eventually their training sessions just turn into Kaken wrestles with Izuku for an hour and always wins. Izuku doesn't know what he expects from him. It's no secret that he's not as big or strong as Kaken or most of the other boys in his class, for that regard. Not that he's by any means a runt, he's just on the shorter side. Always has been. Although, he supposes that these training sessions do count as him getting exercise, which is never a bad thing. Still, he's getting tired of Kaken repeatedly pinning him to the ground or grappling with him and telling him to escape. How can he escape if he's not even learning any real fighting moves? Needless to say, their lessons soon start to involve a lot more of Kaken chasing Izuku around and trying to catch him than any actual fighting moves. They have to make sure Sushi stays inside or go somewhere else to train because on more than one occasion the cat has appeared and attacked Kaken's legs while he chases Izuku. Kaken adds it to the list of reasons why he hates Sushi, but Izuku finds it endearing. He's just being protective of me, Kaken. Izuku says as he pries the cat off of his friend. It's his way of showing he loves me. Kaken's gaze lands on Sushi, who is glaring daggers at him from his spot in Izuku's arms. The blonde bares his teeth and the cat hisses in response. It's his way of being a little sheet. Izuku pouts. Over the next 3 years, Sushi continues to grow both in size and personality. He reigns over the Midoriya household absolutely, watching over his humans with sharp eyes, often from atop the kitchen fridge. Izuku has woken up multiple times during the night to find those pale yellow eyes gazing at him from amidst the darkness. It's a little creepy, he's not gonna lie, but he loves the feline enough to just accept it. What is a bit harder to accept is the strange habit that Sushi develops only a month after living with him. He starts popping up in random places where he's not supposed to be, like in the neighborhood, on top of other people's cars or roofs, and even at Izuku's school a few times. The Midoriyas don't understand how he does it, all their windows and doors are locked when Inko leaves for work, and they don't have a cat flap, so how? It's a bit nerve-wracking at first, but they take solace in knowing that at least Sushi isn't the only outdoor cat out there. Inko suspects he likes to roam around outside because he was probably born as a stray. So, more often than not, Kaken and Izuku will find themselves joined by the fluffy cat on their way back home from school or whenever they're playing with the other kids in the neighborhood. Like now, for example. Kaken and Izuku are both 10 years old and are going to the arcade by themselves for the first time. Well, actually they're supposed to meet up with a few other kids from school there, but Auntie Mitsuki manages to convince Inko that if the boys are old enough to walk to school by themselves then they're old enough to walk to the arcade while the two mothers have a ladies' day. That still doesn't stop Inko from fretting over her son before they leave, though. Okay, you have enough money for tokens, right? Yes, ma'am. And your phone is charged? Yes, ma'am. Not on silent? No. Oh, make sure you dash. Mom. Izuku whines, I'll be fine. Kaken's coming with me and we're gonna be hanging out with other kids the entire time. Okay, I'm sorry, she apologizes, pressing a worried embrace onto her son's forehead. Be safe and have fun, alright? I will. Izuku beams at her before leaving the house, quickly jogging up to Kaken who is waiting for him on the sidewalk. The blonde ruffles his hair as he approaches and Izuku giggles, playfully pushing him away. They start setting off towards the arcade, but as soon as they reach the end of the block Kaken says, "We're being followed, dumbass." Izuku blinks and glances around. By who? I don't see any. When he glances over his shoulder, he sees Sushi gazing up at him from the ground. Once again he must have followed them from the house. Izuku turns around and coos, "Don't worry, Sushi boy. I'll be back in a few hours, so go on back home." Sushi stares. "Go on, go home." Izuku insists, but the cat doesn't move. He just keeps staring with unblinking yellow eyes. The boy pouts, "Come on, Sush, don't make me take you back myself." "You really gotta train that cat better, Zoo," Kaken grumbles, giving said feline his customary stink eye. "He listens to me sometimes." Izuku protests, but it only makes his friends snicker. Sighing in defeat, he straightens up and says, "Let's just keep going. He'll head on home eventually." They continue walking, and to Izuku's relief he doesn't hear the soft pitter-pattering of Sushi's paws following them. Soon, they leave their neighborhood and enter the city. The arcade is only a couple of blocks away from this point, not too long of a walk. Still, Izuku feels very grown-up like strutting through the streets without an adult by his side. When he glances over his shoulder, Sushi is nowhere in sight, and he lets out a sigh of relief. He hopes the cat actually goes home instead of just wandering around the neighborhood, but that might be asking too much. For some reason, however, he still gets the feeling that someone is watching him. The hair on the back of his neck prickles and his eyes dart around, but he doesn't spot anything suspicious. Then, a familiar pink-haired boy standing by the arcade at the end of the street spots them and waves them over with a friendly smile. "Izuku, Katsuki-kun, over here." Pushing the strange feeling out of his mind, Izuku instead plasters a smile on his face and jogs ahead of Kaken to greet their friend. "Hey, Haru-kun." "Izuku-kun." Izuku squeaks as Haru pulls him in to give him a noogie. "You guys took forever to get here. Everyone's already inside." Izuku squirms out of his grasp and pouts when he has to fix his curls. Haru just grins and snickers. The other boy had joined their friend group a few months ago when he transferred into their school. He's pretty cool and extremely friendly, so of course that means that Kaken thinks he's annoying. But Izuku doesn't care. He likes hanging out with Haru, and he also brought a couple of other friends into their group that Tsubasa and Inaba quickly befriend. Plus, he has a super neat quirk called face shift. Basically, he can shapeshift, just only with his face. Kaken thinks it's useless, but Izuku thinks his friend is just jealous, especially since Haru can spend hours making Izuku laugh by giving himself a duck bill or turning his hair different colors. Haru greets Kaken, getting only a grunt of acknowledgement in response, and leads them into the arcade. There are no overhead lights, but they can still see just fine because all the games and booths are lit up with neon lights. It's loud and a little overwhelming, but Haru just laughs and ushers them along to where their group of friends is waiting. The next few hours are probably the most fun Izuku has ever had. Their group goes around playing nearly every single game they see. Kaken challenges practically everyone to beat him in whatever racing games he can find, and he wins most of the time. Izuku tries to beat him and loses, which, while unfortunate, is never a surprise when it comes to Kaken anymore, but Haru cheers him up by giving himself a lizard tongue and flicking it into his ear. Izuku squeals and runs away, Haru giving chase and pursuing him for a couple of minutes until Kaken gets annoyed and drags Izuku off to play air hockey. Turns out he's pretty good at it. His explosive friend's face is priceless when Izuku beats him the first time and only gets more and more comical when Izuku continues to beat him 2 more times. Tsubasa and Haru watch from the sidelines, the latter whooping and cheering for Izuku, which only drives Kaken to fight even harder until he finally wins. Still, at the end Haru comes up to Izuku and congratulates him. "Dang, Izuku, you're really good at air hockey," he says, grinning. Izuku laughs and scratches the back of his head. "Thanks. I never thought I've never really played it before today." "Ah, so you're a natural." Haru puts an arm around him and pointedly ignores the withering glare Kaken sends him. "Well, I think you deserve a prize, then. Come on, let's check out the claw machines." They wander over to the tall box of prizes and Izuku quickly spies a stuffed, marshmallow-shaped All Might toy. He moves to put a couple of tokens in the slot, but Haru stops him. "Allow me," he says smoothly, already grabbing onto the joystick. Izuku blinks. "Are you sure?" "Please." Haru winks. "It's my treat. Which one do you want?" He presses the start button and proceeds to expertly move the claw around, picking his way through the toys until he reaches the All Might stuffy that Izuku points out. Izuku watches with bated breath as the claw lowers and clasps onto it, bringing it over to the drop box and releasing it without a hitch. Haru grabs the toy and hands it to Izuku with a bit of dramatics, which causes him to giggle as he accepts the gift graciously. Then the taller boy straightens up and beams at him, and something about it makes Izuku's heart feel a little funny. His cheeks grow warm and he quickly finds himself hiding his burning face behind the plushie. "Thanks," he squeaks, voice muffled. They all leave soon after that to get lunch somewhere. Kaken still refuses to eat arcade food after that one bout of food poisoning during Tsubasa's 8th birthday party, and as they walk out of the building Kaken spots some TVs in a shop's window broadcasting a villain fight. Further investigation leads to the realization that it's an all-might villain fight, so naturally this sidetracks them for a while. Watch him here," Kaken says. "I bet he's gonna bam. See, I told you he'd do that." He pumps his fists, his eyes practically sparkling as he watches the screen. Man, it doesn't get any cooler than All Might. There's still that other one creeping up on him, though, Haru comments, just as invested as the blonde is. "Do you think he'll Did you see that? Guy didn't even stand a chance." Izuku watches with rapt attention too, albeit behind the group of boys. He'd like to get close, but he knows how excited they can get when they watch one of All Might's fights, and he doesn't want to accidentally get in the way of any flying hands. But man, All Might is never not cool. Izuku wishes he'd brought his hero journal with him, despite the fact that All Might already has almost an entire notebook dedicated to just him. A flash of gray in the corner of his eye distracts him, and his head w's around. Was that Sushi? No, it couldn't be. He couldn't have possibly followed him all the way to the arcade. Just to ease his mind though, Izuku quietly sneaks away from the group to follow the flash of gray. It disappeared into a nearby alleyway, but when he reaches it the cat is nowhere in sight. The alley is dark and full of trash cans and empty crates that lean against the walls. Izuku wrinkles his nose. "Sushi?" he calls out, but the cat still doesn't appear. Letting out a sigh of relief, he's about to turn back and rejoin the group when one of the trash bags suddenly rustles. An empty bottle clatters to the ground. "Sushi!" Izuku exclaims, walking into the alley. "Where are you? Come on out, boy." Silence meets him. The bag rustles again. Izuku frowns. "Are you stuck, buddy?" he asks, jogging over to it. "Don't worry, I'll dash." As soon as he gets close, a man suddenly lunges out from behind the trash bags and pounces on him. He immediately screams and scrambles backwards, but the man grabs him and uses his weight to force him to the ground. A hand covers his mouth, muffling his yelp of pain as his back hits the gravel beneath him. Panic floods his system and he thrashes around wildly, trying to escape, but the man must have some sort of vine quirk because the moment there's thick black vines wrapping around his body, pinning his arms to his sides and locking his legs together. He wails, but black vines quickly wrap around his mouth, gagging him. The man lets out a huff of laughter as he keeps him pinned to the ground, sneering down at him as he continues to struggle. "Don't make this difficult, kid," he growls. Two vines come up to cover Izuku's eyes, blinding him, and the terror within him escalates as his world is plunged into darkness. The man chuckles in his ear. "It'll be better for both of us if you just play nice. Do something funny and I'll make you regret it." Tears well up in Izuku's eyes as he hears a second pair of heavy footsteps approach them. "Hey!" Another voice says, "Did you get him?" "Course I did." His attacker replies. Hands grab at Izuku and he feels himself being pulled to his. His legs are still bound together so he can't walk, but that doesn't seem to matter to the man as he drags him down the alley. "Good," the second voice says. "You sure he's the right one? There were a bunch of kids in that group dash." "Of course I got the right one." The first voice snaps. Izuku continues to struggle against his grasp, letting out muffled screams, until the man gives his head a strong slap. "Oi, you brat. I told you to behave." To his partner, he says, "Don't worry, he's the one. I've been watching this kid for the past 3 weeks. I've seen how his quirk works. Trust me, he'll definitely be worth a pretty penny." Izuku's heart skips a beat at this. They want to sell him? For his quirk? How could this be happening to him? In the back of his mind, he recalls what his mother told him the day his quirk manifested. "Baby, I'm sorry, but you can't just use your quirk on anyone who asks you to, especially not strangers. There are some bad people out there that might want to take you so they can use your quirk." So this is what she was afraid of. This is why she always has Kakin following him around. He had never truly understood. He thought that she was just being overprotective or perhaps was worried about people being mean to him like Furuya and Akamine, but God, this is so much worse than Furuya and Akamine, and this time Kakin's not here to save him. He wails again and thrashes around, slamming his head into his captor's seat. The man lets out an oof and his grip slackens, just a little bit, but it's enough for Izuku to wiggle free. Desperation fills his tea as he tries to make his escape, but it's a pathetic attempt. He's only able to turn and hop forwards once, his limbs still bound, before his second captor is upon him. Hands grab at him and pull him backwards, dragging him even further down the alleyway. They're soon joined by another pair of hands, these ones rougher and no doubt leaving bruises. Little brat. He doesn't even know which one is speaking now. All he's aware of is the sudden explosion of pain in his head as one of the men strikes him. "Eff'n behave or I'll make this hell for you. Just get him in the bag." The other voice snaps, "It'll be easier to bring him in then." Dazed, Izuku feels himself being pushed forward as something is pulled over his head. Fabric? No, he heard the man say it's bag. They're putting him in a bag. The fabric jolts and the next thing he knows his feet are being swept off the ground. He falls onto his side, but his body doesn't hit the ground. Instead, the fabric wraps tighter around him as he gets carried in the bag, his captor's legs hitting him occasionally. "Come on now," one of the men grunts, "the car's out back." Izuku feels like he's going to be sick. The helpless feeling is worse, so much worse now. He's so pathetic, he can't even do anything, he can't even fight. Why did he ever think he could stand a chance on his own? He was right when he told Kakin that his quirk was useless. It was stupid of him to ever think otherwise. He wishes his friend was with him now. He'll no doubt be wondering where Izuku went. Oh God, his mother's never going to find out what happened to him. He'll never see her or Kakin or any of his friends again. What the fuki? One of the men suddenly shouts. Izuku is abruptly dropped to the ground and he grunts, wondering what's going on. He can hear hissing and spitting and one of his captors is yelling, but no, wait, he's heard that hiss before. He hears it every time Kakin comes over to his house, but it can't be. "You Sushi?" he cries, his voice muffled by the black vines. "What the F is wrong with this FING cat?" The man shrieks, get it off dash. "You know, they say cats are excellent judges of character," an entirely new voice suddenly says. Feet hit the ground with a loud thud and the vines around Izuku disappear. He blinks at the darkness of the bag, confused and terrified. He doesn't know what's happening, but he thinks the new person is fighting his captors, if the sounds of punching and grunting are anything to go by. Something sharp pokes at his arm and he flinches, feeling a heavy but all too familiar weight settle on top of him. Tears leak out of his eyes. "Is Sushi high?" He hiccups. A loud meow in his ear is the response he gets and he winces as the cat starts trying to claw the bag open. It's enough to spur him into action and try to get out on his own, but his movements are slow and awkward. His head is still throbbing in pain from when one of the men struck him and he feels extremely nauseous when he pushes himself onto his hands and knees. There's not much space in the bag and the fabric presses against his face as he straightens up, trying to figure out where the opening is. He kicks and pushes everywhere he can, but it must be tied shut because nothing budges. "Sushi," he cries, trembling with fear, I'm stuck, I can't dash." "Hang on, kid," the new voice says, and suddenly there's hands pulling at the bag from the outside. "I've almost got you." Light pierces his eyes and he winces, blinking rapidly. As soon as he's freed from the bag, Sushi climbs onto his lap and nuzzles his face, purring loudly. He lets out a wet chuckle of relief, wrapping his arms around the feline, before he blearily looks up. A black-haired man with a scarf around his neck is crouched in front of him, staring at him with thinly veiled worry. It's obvious that he's the one who saved him, but Izuku is dazed and shaken from the attack, so when the man reaches towards him he can't help but flinch away. The man notices and immediately retracts his hand, instead reaching into his pocket to pull out a plastic card. "I'm an underground hero," the man says, showing him the card. "My name's Eraserhead." "It's alright, I won't hurt you, I just want to see where you're injured." Izuku blinks at him slowly, still clutching his cat to his ear. An underground hero. A pro hero. He knows, he'd normally be freaking out right now, either asking the hero a million questions or begging him for his autograph. Probably both. But all he can do is let his eyes slide past the man to the far wall, where his two kidnappers are leaning against each other unconscious. They seem to be tied up in some sort of gray cloth. He looks to his right to see a car parked only a few feet away, its trunk wide open. The bag is on the ground next to him. Then, he looks back at Eraserhead and promptly bursts into tears. He cries harder than he's ever cried in his life, tears and snot dripping down his face as relief crashes into him. He hugs Sushi tight and just sobs into his fur, his dissipating fear and adrenaline leaving him trembling violently. Eraserhead waits patiently for him to cry himself out, putting a large hand on his shoulder in an awkward attempt at comfort. Izuku was nearly taken. He was nearly kidnapped. For his quirk. For what he gave out of generosity, people just wanted to steal without any regard for him, and oh god, it's so much worse than any middle school bullies. Those men were watching him. If he hadn't been there. Izuku is suddenly all too aware that the car is still only a few feet away. His stomach flips and he sobs even harder. Eventually, probably a solid 5 minutes later, Izuku finally manages to lift his head up from Sushi's now thoroughly soaked fur and croaks brokenly, "Thank you." "No problem," Eraserhead says, blinking down at him. "What's your name, kid?" "Me Midoriya Izuku," he replies, slightly slurred. "Did you hit your head?" When Izuku nods shakily, the hero takes out a small flashlight from his utility belt and shines it into his eyes. You have a mild concussion. Are you hurting anywhere else?" Izuku nods again and Eraserhead proceeds to check him head to toe, speaking softly to him the entire time. Aside from the concussion, he just has a bunch of scrapes and bruises, most of them from the vines, which, Eraserhead explains, disappeared because he used his quirk to erase the first man's quirk. "That's cool," Izuku murmurs, giving him a weary smile. "Thanks," Eraserhead huffs. "I'm gonna call the police to take these guys in. Do you have any idea why they targeted you?" Yeah," Izuku replies, sniffling. His voice is small and shaky as he says, My quirk. They wanted me for my quirk. It's a healing quirk, and they said they wanted to sell me, I think." He squeezes his eyes shut at the memory and hugs Sushi tighter. When he opens them again, Eraserhead's jaw is clenched. "Right," he grunts. "Well, sit tight, kid." Eraserhead keeps a comforting hand on his shoulder as he fishes out his phone and calls the police. As he reports what happened, Izuku fumbles around with his own phone and is relieved to see that it isn't damaged. The light hurts his eyes, but he notices the numerous text messages and missed calls that have popped up on his screen. His fingers are trembling too strong to type out a proper message, but he manages to send his location to Kaken before his phone slips from his hands. "You shouldn't use your phone when you have a concussion," Eraserhead says. The hero sits down heavily next to him and leans against the wall. He raises an eyebrow at Sushi, who doesn't seem to mind his presence too much. "Is that your cat?" Izuku nods. His name is Sushi." That seems to amuse the pro-hero, who lets out a snort. "He's not supposed to be out here," Izuku adds, "mostly because he doesn't want to sit in silence. He usually only stays in our neighborhood, but he wouldn't listen to me when I told him to go home." "Yeah, cats aren't exactly obedient," Eraserhead replies. He glances at the entrance of the alleyway, which Izuku didn't realize was so far away. The villains must have dragged him farther than he thought. He's near the opposite end of the alley that opens up to a barren parking lot, hence the car. The car that he almost got trapped in. The car that almost took him away from his life forever. Izuku sniffles again and tightens his grip on Sushi. "Where are your parents?" the underground hero asks, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Are they nearby?" No, I was with Dash. Zigyu." Eraserhead tenses up as Kaken appears at the entrance of the alley, breathing heavily. His crimson eyes land on the man and he bares his teeth, charging forward. Who the hell are you? He snarls, explosions popping in his palms. Get away from him. Kaken, wait. Izuku cries. Eraserhead stands up and intercepts the blonde before he can reach them. His scarf flares around him and his eyes flash red, causing the explosions to disappear. Kaken only manages to look down at his hands in surprise before the scarf wraps around him, binding him tightly. What the hell? Kaken screeches, thrashing around. Get off me. I'll kill you. Kaken. Izuku yells more insistently. The loud noises are killing his head, but he ignores it for now. Stop. He's a pro hero. You know this kid? Eraserhead asks, sounding a bit unimpressed. Izuku confirms and he sighs, loosening his grip slightly. Relax, kid, I'm not gonna hurt your friend here. He was just attacked by a couple of villains and I took them down. He turns slightly so Kaken can see the unconscious men still tied together. Kaken's eyes narrow before he squirms out of his scarf. Zuku! He runs over to Izuku and kneels down in front of him, grabbing his shoulders lightly. Are you alright? What the hell happened? And what the F is Sushi doing here? Sushi, who is still curled up against Izuku's tea, hisses and tries to swipe at Kaken, but the boy dodges. Izuku stutters. The pain in his head is making it strong for him to talk and he kind of just wants to take a nap, but he forces his eyes to stay open. Thankfully, Eraserhead explains for him. Those guys were trying to kidnap him and sell him off, he states bluntly. Kaken's eyes widen and he WHPs his head to look at him. Eraserhead continues, healing quirks are rare and considered valuable, so dash. I know that. Kaken snaps. Eraserhead's eye twitches but Kaken just turns back to Izuku, hands flexing like he doesn't know what to do with them. Sheet, Zuku, are you? His eyes roam over him, from his bruised arms and face to his glazed eyes. His jaw clenches. Sheet. Sheet dash. If you could call his parents that would be helpful, Eraserhead interrupts. Kaken surprisingly does so without much fuss. Izuku cringes at the police sirens as they get closer. His head feels like it's about to explode and he's even more tired now. He can hear Kaken on the phone with his mother, who is no doubt freaking out. Eraserhead helps him to his feet and leads him to one of the police cars, ushering Kaken in as well before turning to help some officers put the two villains into another car. He's not coming with us? Kaken asks as the officer in front starts driving away. Heroes don't usually accompany victims to the police station, kid, the officer replies. He has to stay behind to give his report and then he'll probably just continue his patrol. Right? I knew that, Kaken grumbles under his breath. He glances at Izuku, who is idly petting Sushi with drooping eyelids as he leans against his shoulder. Hey, stay awake. Izuku whines but obliges. The drive to the police station is fairly quick and soon Izuku is being examined by a nurse, who confirms that he has a mild concussion. Kaken has to hold Sushi the whole time, which neither of them are happy about. He shifts in his seat impatiently while she cleans and bandages Izuku's scrapes, telling him to take it easy for the next few days to give his brain time to heal. Thankfully, it's summer break, so at least he won't have to take time off of school. Then, a police officer comes in and asks him a bunch of questions, helping him file a report which he writes down on his clipboard. Kaken stays silent the entire time, only occasionally growling at a particular detail or grumbling when Sushi digs his claws into his lap. Once the report is complete, the officer hands it off to someone else before waiting with them for their parents to arrive. 10 minutes later, Inko bursts in with Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru at her heels. She's already a blubbering mess, but when she sees Izuku's bruised face she cries even harder. Oh my baby! She sobs, hugging him tightly. My baby, my poor baby. Glad to see you're okay, kiddo, Auntie Mitsuki says, then turns to Kaken with a scowl on her face. And where the hell were you? Hey, I thought he was with me the whole time. Kaken snaps. I didn't even realize they'd taken him until dash. Guys, please, the officer interrupts, raising her hands. Lower your voices. Midoriya-kun has a concussion and yelling isn't going to make him feel better. Inko whimpers and buries her face into her son's hair. Sushi, who made the mistake of climbing back into Izuku's lap while they were waiting, meows in distress as he's squished between them. Sushi? Inko hiccups, pulling away slightly. "What are you doing here?" Izuku smiles tiredly and snuggles him closer. "He tried to fight off the bad guys," he says, a hint of pride in his voice. Inko looks confused. Uncle Masaru turns to the police officer and asks, "Please, can you tell us exactly what happened? We only got a vague idea from Katsuki. Did someone really try to kidnap Izuku?" The officer nods and repeats what was reported by both Izuku and Eraserhead. Inko looks like she's about to faint when she hears that the villains wanted to sell Izuku for his quirk. Auntie Mitsuki growls and Uncle Masaru tenses up, casting a worried look toward the boy. When the officer is done, she informs Inko of Izuku's injuries and tells her that he will need to take it easy for the next few days and get lots of rest. Inko nods hastily and thanks the officer before helping her son into the car. She was still with Auntie Mitsuki when she got the call from Kaken, so the woman drove her and Uncle Masaru to the station in her car. It's a bit of a squeeze with 5 people and a cat, but they make it back home with relative ease. When they get out of the car, Kaken, who was silent the entire ride, asks Inko if he and Izuku can have a sleepover. "Oh, of course." Inko says, "I'll put the futon in Izuku's room. Just remember that he needs a lot of rest and no video games. They're bad for his concussion." "It's fine," Kaken replies, "I just want to." He trails off, eyeing Izuku before glancing away with gritted teeth. Inko smiles understandingly and nods. "Do you mind if Masaru and I come over for a bit?" Auntie Mitsuki asks, "I can help you cook dinner." "You look like you could use some company." "Thank you," Inko sighs. So they all enter the Midoriya household, Inko helping Izuku to the couch like he's made of glass. Kaken and Sushi settle in beside him while the adults move to the kitchen. There's not much to do since he's not allowed to watch TV, but he's too tired to do that anyway, so he just lets his head drop onto his friend's shoulder. After a moment, Kaken wraps his arm around Izuku and pulls him closer, resting his chin on top of his curls. Izuku lets out a soft sigh, closing his eyes and listening to his friend breathe. He can hear the adults in the kitchen and Inko's muffled cries. His mother is obviously trying to keep her voice low as she speaks with Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru in hushed tones, but her sniffling and occasional whimpers are as clear as day. His heart aches for her, he knows how badly this must have shaken her. But right now, he's too tired to even consider consoling her. So, with his head on Kaken's shoulder and his cat curled up against him, Izuku drifts off to sleep. If some fucker comes along and decides to snatch Izuku because he wants to force him to use his quirk, what are you gonna do? "I'll beat him up, of course. I'll beat up any fucker who tries to take him." Katsuki is Zuku's protector. He knows this. It's been this way for over half their lives now, and not once has he complained about it. The role comes as naturally to him as the explosions in his palms do. Those guys were trying to kidnap him and sell him off. His arm tightens around Zuku's sleeping form. But this time, someone else had to save him. Someone else had to be his protector. Someone else had to do Katsuki's DMN job for him. And if they hadn't, Zuku would be. Auntie Inko's soft cries from the kitchen reach his ears, interrupting his thoughts. He can hear his mother's voice, gentler than he's ever heard, trying to soothe her as she struggles to muffle her sobs. His teeth suddenly feels too tight. He knows that if he looks down he'll see the numerous scrapes and bruises from the villains littering Zuku's skin. "And where the hell were you? And where the hell were you? And where the hell were you?" Zuku lets out a soft whimper. Katsuki immediately loosens his hold around him, having unconsciously tightened his arm into a vice grip. Zuku relaxes against him once more, but the burning, self-loathing anger remains. There's something else to it, though. He's used to anger. There's not a day that passes in which he doesn't get angry at one thing or another. But this is different. This is what he felt back when he saw the bruises those 2 upperclassmen assholes left on Zuku, or what he felt when he saw that dog going to attack him, except it's worse, because he didn't win. He didn't fight. He didn't protect him. This is Katsuki's first taste of failure. And he doesn't like it one bit. After that, the danger that Izuku's quirk puts him in becomes more real. Inko sits him down a few days later and tells him everything Dr. Tsubasa warned her about the day his quirk manifested. She hadn't wanted to fully tell him when he was younger because she didn't want him to worry, or worse, think his quirk was a bad thing. But now it's clear that in order for him to be safe, for him to really take his safety seriously, she needs to tell him everything. So she begins by explaining how Dr. Tsubasa said his quirk is very strong and will only get stronger as he grows up, which is a wonderful thing, but it means they have to take some precautions. She goes on to say that because healing quirks are so rare, especially powerful ones like Izuku's, that it's not unheard of for healers to be sought after by both heroes and villains. The latter because they can't go to the hospital after a fight, so healers are especially valuable to them. In fact, healers getting captured by villains isn't something that might happen but something that can and has. She hesitates to mention the incident with Endeavor's healer, not wanting to scare her son, but eventually she tells him. He deserves to know everything now. Izuku listens with a blank look on his face, gazing down at his lap the entire time. He stays silent when Inko finishes and it makes the woman fidget nervously. Finally, she takes his hands into hers and has him meet her gaze. Her eyes are watery but her gaze is firm. Baby, she starts, then clears her throat. Izuku, I don't want to scare you. I never wanted to scare you by telling you this, It's okay, Mom, he says, I understand. It's a little weird, you know? I'm just me. It's weird to think that I'm desirable to people I don't even know, and just for my quirk? It's just weird. He scratches the back of his head. And I always thought that Kaken was a bit paranoid and overprotective, but now, I guess it makes sense. Oof, and I bet he's gonna be a lot worse after this. He lets out a huff of laughter, but there isn't much humor in it. Inko gives him a sad smile and squeezes his hands. I know it's probably going to be annoying and tiresome being attached to his hip all the time, but I need you to take it a bit more seriously. Katsuki-kun is your protector. He knows that, and I need you to know it as well. Izuku presses his lips together and nods once. And it won't just be him, Inko adds. Dr. Tsubasa-san said that a lot of hero agencies upped the security around their healers after the incident with Endeavor's agency. So, just know that Katsuki-kun isn't going to be the only overprotective hero you're going to have to deal with when you get older. She laughs. Izuku rolls his eyes but smiles a bit. I'm excited for you to become a healer, his mother says, but you haven't joined the world of heroes yet. And until you do, you need to be careful. So, she takes a deep breath before continuing. I've talked about it with Mitsuki-san and Masaru-san. And I think it would be a good idea to enroll you in self-defense classes. Izuku perks up. Really? I know it might be a lot on top of school and I know you like to hang out with your friends, but No, Mom, I'd love to. Izuku insists, leaning forward. Finally he'll be able to fend for himself if he needs to. Inko blinks in surprise. Really? He nods rapidly and she smiles. Oh good. Katsuki-kun would be going with you. Of course, it'll be good for him too. Maybe give him an outlet for that explosive energy. Yeah. Izuku agrees eagerly. When do we start? Oh, next week, Inko says, giving him a firm look, if even. You're still recovering from your concussion, sweetie. Izuku sighs heavily and groans. Mom, I told you I'm feeling a lot better. My head only hurts a little bit now. And you'll start next week when your head doesn't hurt at all. Inko's voice has a tone of finality and Izuku knows there's no budging on this. Fine, he grunts. So he now has self-defense classes to look forward to while he recovers. This whole week has been kind of awful for Izuku. First he nearly gets kidnapped and now he has to do absolutely nothing for an entire week. He can't even play video games or watch movies. The nurse told Inko that electronics are bad for someone recovering from a concussion, so now his screen time is severely limited. It doesn't help that he's been having nightmares just about every night too. During the first night when Kaken had come over for a sleepover, Izuku thought perhaps he'd be too tired from his ordeal to have a nightmare. But no, at 2 a.m. he woke up thrashing and screaming, scrambling backwards in his bed to escape his non-existent kidnappers. Kaken had jumped from his futon and been at his side in an instant, pulling him into a tight hug when he whimpered and cried. He seemed upset, too angry, mostly, and had nudged Izuku aside so he could crawl into bed beside him. Izuku clung to his arm and fell asleep again, only for Kaken to wake him up from another nightmare at 5 a.m. So, needless to say, he's both exhausted and bored out of his mind. And on top of all this, he has to somehow tell Haru that he lost the All Might stuffy he won for him. He didn't realize until the next day that he had lost the gift during his ordeal and instantly felt bad. Haru would probably be forgiving if he knew the truth, but Kaken had explained their sudden absence by texting the group that Izuku felt sick, so he took him home. Izuku is grateful for that. As much as he likes his friends, he knows that news of Izuku's near kidnapping would spread like a wildfire across school if any of them got wind of it. So now he has to think of what to tell Haru. Or maybe he can just take a nap and hope that the boy doesn't mention it when they go back to school. Yeah, that sounds better. At least, during his very long week of rest, he's able to spend some quality time with his hero journals. He adds a couple of pages for Eraserhead, who he hadn't known about until the hero rescued him. He was only able to thoroughly freak out the next day. He had met a pro hero, an underground one, and talked to him. Like, actually talked to him, not just sputtered awkwardly and begged for his autograph. Izuku's almost glad he had a concussion then, so at least he was too dazed to embarrass himself. Still, Eraserhead was so cool. Izuku diligently writes down what little he learned about him from their encounter and spends the short amount of time he's allowed on the computer researching more about him. Not much is known about the underground hero, which isn't very surprising, but Izuku is at least able to find out about his quirk and fighting techniques. The latter part he thinks is very cool. He basically fights quirkless. He rambles about his findings to Kaken, who comes to his house every day that week to keep him company. The blonde doesn't seem too interested but listens anyway because, like Izuku, there's not much for him to do. He doesn't want to play video games if Izuku can't play with him, and they can't go train in the backyard either because Inko wants him to rest. So they're both bored. They talk about anything and everything from what they ate for dinner to their futures at UA. Because of course they're going to UA. Nothing could make them happier than going to All Might's alma mater, even if Izuku will probably have to apply for general studies. He wonders if he'll meet Recovery Girl if he gets in, and that leads to him pulling out his healer journal. Kaken is kind enough to use Izuku's phone and computer for him and reads out loud whatever Izuku wants him to research. They spend an entire afternoon updating Izuku's healer journal, the greenette scribbling down information while the blonde reads with a disinterested tone. Still, that eventually gets boring. Izuku is grateful for his friend's presence but feels bad that he's sacrificing a week out of his summer break just to sit around with him and do nothing. Surely there are other fun things he would rather be doing, but when he mentions it, Kaken just nudges him with his foot and tells him to not be stupid. Sushi, at least, is enjoying his constant presence. Inko gave the cat a very stern talking to for following Izuku into the city, which was very amusing to watch, but now Sushi is living his best life since Izuku has time to spoil him. He and Kaken discover that the feline, for some reason, really likes water. Izuku hasn't used the bathtub in years, mostly because he just prefers the efficiency of showering, but since he has nothing else to do, he's started taking long soaks in the hot water. And without fail, Sushi always somehow gets into the bathroom, even if he closes the door, and proceeds to jump in with him. Kaken calls Sushi a freak and the cat merely hisses at him in response. After what feels like ages, Izuku's week of rest is finally over and he's feeling more restless than ever. He has to practically beg his mom to let him and Kaken walk a couple of blocks away to get ice cream from a small corner shop. He doesn't blame her for her incessant worrying, but it does get a bit annoying, especially when he notices Kaken glancing around suspiciously every few seconds as they walk. He hopes this paranoia won't last too long. Maybe if he gets really good at self-defense, they won't worry so much. At least, that's what he's hoping for as he walks into the martial arts gym with Kaken for their first class. It's exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time, but he relaxes slightly when the teacher greets them with a wide smile and mentions that all the other students are beginners too. Kimura-sensei is super nice, even though she looks really intimidating. Her skin is made up of strong, purple-tinted scales that are tough like crocodile skin, and her eyes are yellow with slitted pupils. Despite this, she has a soft voice and a bubbly personality, but it becomes clear she also doesn't take any bullshit when Kaken makes a snide comment after she says that the first couple of lessons will be just learning how to properly throw punches and kicks. The blonde blinks in surprise when her entire personality changes and she throws a fiery retort at him that makes the rest of the class snicker. He clearly takes her a bit more seriously after that. The self-defense classes are fun but a lot harder than Izuku thought they would be. Once school starts back up again, Izuku finds himself restraining himself from using his quirk just so that he has enough energy to get through his after-school lessons. They're only on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, but Kimura makes it very clear she expects them to keep practicing at home. So, after a few months of real training, Izuku and Kaken start going on runs together. The lessons are physically demanding for both of them, so they figure that running might help them build muscle and become stronger. Izuku likes it, especially when he discovers that he's a faster runner than Kaken, which pisses his friend off. Their casual jogging often turns into full-on sprinting as they race each other. It's super fun, even if it does leave their legs shaking with exhaustion afterwards. Izuku soon starts having to put his hair into a small ponytail when he exercises. When Kaken questions why he's growing out his hair, Izuku replies that he just feels like it. He doesn't mention that he thought it would be cool to grow his hair out like Eraserhead's, that would no doubt lead to endless teasing. He's not sure how long he's going to grow it or if he's even going to keep it this way, but he'll see how it goes. As time goes by and the two boys get older, Inko gradually becomes more relaxed. She still worries about Izuku, but at least he doesn't have to text her every 10 minutes when he's somewhere that isn't school or home. She listens with a smile on her face when Izuku comes home and tries to show her the moves he learned during self-defense class that day, and he knows that his growing strength is definitely helping to ease her mind. Kaken clearly enjoys the classes too. A bit too much, actually. It's not super concerning at first because he's usually too sore and tired to do much outside of class, but once they start learning how to actually fight, things start to take a bit of a downward spiral. Izuku first notices it when Kaken eagerly jumps up to volunteer when Kimura says she needs someone to act as an attacker so she can show them a particular defense move. Kaken gets knocked to the ground, of course, but Izuku finds it a bit odd how excited he gets whenever they do one-on-one fighting. He's always willing to take the offensive role, and it only starts to become a bit of a problem when Kimura starts actually teaching them how to attack, deeming it important to learn both defensive and offensive skills. Then one day Izuku walks onto the schoolyard with his lunch in hand just in time to see Kaken using one of the new offensive moves on a fellow classmate. And that's when things take a turn for the worse. It's not that Izuku's unused to Kaken getting into fights, he's healed his friend more times than he can count after he gets into a scuffle. The problem now is that Kaken is no longer just showing off his quirk or roughhousing, he's got real fighting experience and is practicing those moves on random school kids. It horrifies Izuku and he immediately tries to put an end to it, but Kaken doesn't seem too pleased with him. "Come on, Kaken, you've gotta admit it's kind of unfair," Izuku protests one day as they're walking home. "You know a lot more about fighting than they do and one day you're gonna get someone really hurt." So? Kaken rolls his eyes. "I've got you around, so why does it matter if they get hurt?" Taken aback, Izuku scowls. "I'm not going to heal people just so you can beat them up again." Kaken just grumbles in response. After a moment, he snaps, "And who cares if it's unfair? Fights are hardly ever fair, and those kids know what they're getting into when they're challenging me." Izuku would hardly call it challenging. Kaken is usually the one to seek out fights. Sighing, he changes tactics and instead suggests, "Listen, why don't we start sparring after school? It'll be good to burn off any extra energy you have and I'm sure Kimura-sensei will be glad to see that we've gotten some more practice in." Kaken doesn't look impressed. "Well, yeah, but..." He turns his head away and grumbles unintelligibly under his breath. Smiling a bit, Izuku nudges his shoulder and says, "Come on. It'll be fun." "Yeah, but I can't dash." Kaken cuts himself off and Izuku tilts his head curiously. The blonde lets out a ragged sigh and gestures vaguely with his hand. "I mean, I can't hurt you, so what's the point?" Izuku blinks in surprise. His stomach churns uncomfortably. Something about what he said doesn't sit right with him. Clearing his throat, he asks warily, do you want to hurt people?" Kaken glances at him but doesn't respond. Izuku swallows. His friend's violent streak has always been a bit annoying but has generally never really been a cause for concern. But now, well, if you say it like that it sounds bad, Kaken finally huffs. It is bad, Izuku says immediately, then hesitates. Kaken? I don't think you should want to hurt people. The other boy is quiet for a moment, then suddenly snorts and bumps his shoulder. Oh, relax, Zuku. He sneers, you're overreacting. I just like to mess around and roughhouse a bit. Izuku must not look very convinced, because he adds, but fine, yeah, whatever, let's spar if it'll make you feel better. It does, but only a little bit. They spar in their self-defense class sometimes, so doing it after school isn't really anything new. It seems to slightly satisfy Kaken's violent tendencies, but the boy is still much too harsh to the other kids at school for Izuku's liking. It starts with Haru. Kaken has never really liked Haru, and Izuku has never really understood why. Haru is kind and friendly and can always make Izuku laugh until his cheeks hurt, but for some reason when they turn 12 Kaken decides to start picking on him. It's just little things at first, rude comments about his quirk or making fun of something he did. Izuku does his best to ease the tension with a light smile and a changing of subjects, but soon it's not enough. As they get older, the occasional teasing becomes constant, turning meaner and crueler every day. Even when Haru eventually stops hanging out with them, Kaken still seeks him out to pester him. And where Kaken leads, Tsubasa and Inaba follow. It's really sad to watch, actually. To see Haru's former friends turn against him and relentlessly torment him. Izuku tries to soothe him in between class PRDS or right after lunch, but when Kaken finds out he gets said and does everything he can to stop Izuku from speaking with Haru. The situation leaves a very bad taste in Izuku's mouth. He just feels so sorry for Haru. He hates seeing the familiar helpless look in his eyes when Kaken starts hounding him. It frustrates him and it angers him too. But no matter what he says, no matter how much he protests this harsh treatment, Kaken doesn't let up. In fact, he starts harassing other students too, but Haru is his favorite victim. It all comes to a head during the first month of their third year of junior high. Kaken and Izuku are both 14 years old, the former almost 15, and puberty is hitting strong. Hormones are high and Kaken's violent streak is returning with a vengeance. Over the years, both he and his quirk have grown dramatically. Self-defense classes on top of regular exercise has led to Kaken developing a good few pounds of muscle. Izuku hasn't bulked up as much as his friend has, but he's lean and defined and most importantly he's still faster than him, so there's that. Aside from Kaken's increase in muscle and height, he hasn't changed much appearance-wise. Neither has Izuku, although his hair is a lot longer now, falling a few inches below his shoulders. Contrast, his quirk hasn't grown much, although Kaken's definitely has. The boy's explosions are so powerful they can be heard from the other side of school. But what's worse is that he's become unafraid to use them against other people. Izuku tries to convince himself that it's just hormones, that hormones are the reason why Kaken's become more aggressive and pushy with him lately, why he goes as far as to physically drag him away from people he doesn't want him to talk to. That hormones are why he continues to start fights with other kids, even when no one is crazy enough to want to get into a fight with him anymore, so he just ends up pouncing on innocent victims. That hormones are why he teases and sneers at his own friends. But there's no way hormones can explain why Kaken treats Haru the way he does. It drives Izuku crazy, especially since Haru has never done anything to wrong him. In fact, he actively avoids Kaken because he knows what'll happen if the blonde catches him. So when Kaken starts attacking Haru after school one day during the second week of their third year, Izuku tries once again to stop him. Kaken! Izuku cries out, running towards the two boys rolling around in the dirt. Kaken, stop it! Please! He almost reaches them when he's suddenly stopped by a large red wing. Hey, Midoriya-kun, Tsubasa says, grinning at him. Behind him, Izuku can see Haru desperately snapping at Kaken with his face turned into a dog's snout. Oh, don't worry about Bakugo-kun, Tsubasa continues, he's just teaching Haru a lesson. He's hurting him. Izuku protests, flinching when he hears an explosion followed by a yelp of pain. Stop it! Kaken, stop it! He tries to run towards them again, but Tsubasa's wing stops him once more, this time blocking his view too. The larger boy steps closer. Come on now, Midoriya-kun, Tsubasa says. He starts slowly flapping his wings towards Izuku, forcing him to step backwards or get hit. Hey, Tsubasa-kun. Frustrated, Izuku tries to step around, but Tsubasa's wings have grown with him and are much larger than they used to be. Izuku grunts as a wing hits his itsy, gentle enough to not hurt him but strong enough to push him back. Relax, Midoriya-kun, this is just hero stuff, Tsubasa says dismissively, using his wings to herd the smaller boy away. Don't concern yourself with this. Bakugo-kun will walk you home soon enough. To Izuku's disbelief, the boy is smiling at him like nothing is wrong, like he doesn't even realize that what Kaken is doing is horrible. He can still hear the angry yells and explosions from his childhood friend behind Tsubasa, as well as Haru's grunts and yelps of pain. It makes Izuku's eyes sting with frustrated tears and a strong ball form in his throat. A feeling of helplessness rises within him, but it only angers him even more, spurring him into action. With a strong shove, he pushes past Tsubasa's wing with his shoulder and dashes over to the two boys. Kaken has Haru pinned to the ground and raises his fist once more, sparks dancing across his skin. Kaken, no! Izuku lunges forward and wraps his arms around Kaken's itsy, stumbling backwards as he drags him off of Haru. Kaken sputters and thrashes wildly, but it buys Haru enough time to scramble out from underneath the blonde and stagger to his feet. Izuku watches as Haru, burned and bruised with a bleeding nose, casts him a grateful look and runs away before Kaken manages to break out of his hold. Zuku, what the F dash? Kaken shrieks, twisting away from him and whirling around. What's your effing problem? Thu. Izuku shouts, clenching his fists as he glares angrily. Kaken, you could have killed him. Kaken rolls his eyes and scoffs. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Zuku. I was just roughing him up a bit. No, you weren't. You were hurting him. Izuku protests. What did he ever do to you anyway? He was pissing me off, Kaken states, as if that explains everything. What the hell are you even doing here? I thought I've told you a million times to stay out of the way when I fight. Yeah, sorry, Tsubasa says, scratching the back of his head as he walks over to them. He got past me. Kaken arches an eyebrow and snorts. How pathetic are you to let a guy with a healing quirk get past you? Izuku frowns, his heart still thudding with adrenaline. What's that supposed to mean? He snaps. It means dash. Kaken swings his head back to fix him with a strong look, poking him in the itsy with a finger. That you've got no business getting involved with fights. You're gonna be a healer, not a hero, so quit acting like you're anything more than a guy with a healing quirk. Izuku's eyes widen and he stumbles back a step, as if struck by a physical blow. A flash of something passes over Kaken's face before it regains its usual cocky expression. Izuku swallows and grits his teeth, glaring strong. Well, anyway, we gonna head to the arcade or what? Tsubasa asks. Inaba-kun should be here soon. Yeah, Kaken huffs, still eyeing Izuku. Sure, whatever. He pauses before clearing his throat impatiently, turning his face to show his bruised cheek where Haru must have landed a hit on him. He doesn't say anything, but the expectation is clear. Izuku almost laughs out loud. Kaken seriously expects him to heal his injuries after saying something like that to him? Bullshit. Izuku usually tries not to curse much, but right now he wants to scream obscenities at his childhood friend. But instead he just takes another step back. I need to get something first, he says, voice hollow. I forgot something in the locker room. I'll come with you dash, Kaken starts to say. No, Izuku interrupts, already turning away. I'll be right back. Without waiting for a response, he turns and dashes over to where he saw Haru disappear. He spots the boy sitting against the wall next to the water fountain, hissing as he dabs at his burns with a wet tissue. Haru-kun, Izuku whispers. Haru flinches but relaxes slightly when he realizes it's him. He gives the greenette a weary smile that Izuku cannot return. He slowly walks over to where the boy is sitting, gasping softly when he sees the extent of the wounds littering his body. Burns, scrapes, bruises. God, Kaken brutalized him. I'm sorry, he croaks, falling to his knees in front of Haru. I'm so sorry, I should have stopped him sooner. I don't understand why he treats you this way, I dash. Izuku, it's okay, Haru says, and Izuku lets out a single wet laugh at the old nickname. This isn't your fault, Haru continues. I guess Bakugo-kun found out I was thinking of applying to UA. You are? Izuku blinks in surprise. I was, Haru corrects, then winces. Now I'm thinking maybe it's best if I don't. I only mentioned it to a couple of people, but Bakugo-kun must have found out anyway and, well, he gestures to himself. He's pretty adamant about you and him being the only ones from this school to get into UA. Izuku grits his teeth. I didn't know you wanted to be a hero, he admits. Oh no. Haru shakes his head. I was going for general studies. Izuku can't believe his ears. If Kaken beat up Haru because he wanted to get into the hero course, well, it wouldn't have made it okay, but at least it would have made sense. Kaken's always been the competitive type. But to beat up Haru just because he wants to get into the same school as him? God, what the hell has Kaken turned into? Izuku's never been so set off before in his life. Taking. Wants to be like Recovery Girl and go around the world helping where he's needed? Or maybe he just wants to have the freedom to figure it out because God forbid he doesn't know exactly how his life is going to pan out at 14 years old. He just wants to do things and make decisions without Kaken hanging over his shoulder. And he forced him to use his quirk. It was like Furuya and Akamine all over again. He startles out of his thoughts when he bumps into someone. Oh, sorry sir. He apologizes, jumping back. Thankfully, the man waves him off. Don't worry about it, kid, he says. You seeing this? He jerks his chin forward and Izuku follows his gaze. There's a few TVs in a shop window all simultaneously playing the news, which is broadcasting a villain fight. It looks like some sort of sludge monster is rampaging in the Tuin shopping district only a few blocks away. Izuku perks up when he sees the hero Death Arms arrive on scene and quickly takes one of his hero journals to write notes in, pushing his anger out of his mind for the moment. The man beside him gives him an amused glance and asks, "Are you a fanboy?" Oh. Izuku startles, then shrinks in on himself sheepishly. I guess so, I just really like analyzing quirks and stuff. He trails off awkwardly, not quite knowing the proper response. Normally Kaken would have saved him from answering by either doing it for him or snapping at the stranger to mind his own business. Thankfully, the man just smiles. No need to be ashamed. He says, there are plenty of worse hobbies to have. Oh, would you look at that? Izuku looks back at the screen in time to see the villain swatting Death Arms away before attacking his sidekicks. It seems that the sludge villain has taken a woman with a fire quirk hostage and is somehow utilizing her quirk to wreak havoc. Other heroes show up, but it's clear their own powers aren't suited to deal with this situation. Izuku feels bad, both for the woman and the heroes. He knows how awful it is to feel like you're powerless in a certain situation. The struggle goes on for a lot longer than he would have thought it would. The heroes dodge attacks but make no attempt to go on the offense. The woman is unconscious now, hanging limply in the villain's grasp as it continues to use her quirk. It's a rather ugly situation to watch, and the man next to Izuku expresses his disappointment in the heroes. Izuku wants to say something in their defense, but before he can a flash of white darts in to attack. A moment later he realizes that it's All Might, seemingly in his civilian clothes. The sludge villain grabs onto the number one hero with its sticky tendrils, but, unlike Death Arms, he's able to pull himself free. Then, he grabs the woman with one hand and with the other he blasts the villain away with a Detroit smash. Izuku's jaw drops in awe and people around him stop too, looking up at the sky where a large wind tornado spirals upward. A few moments later it dissipates, followed by dark clouds rolling in and drizzling rain. Wow! The man beside him barks. He changed the weather with just one punch. That's All Might for you. Izuku giggles and looks back at the screen where All Might is standing amongst the wreckage of the attack. He raises his fist as the crowd goes wild, then gently scoops up the unconscious woman and brings her to paramedics waiting nearby. While they check her over, he talks to reporters and the other heroes gather up the scattered pieces of sludge. Satisfied, Izuku is about to turn and keep walking when a sharp gasp from a reporter catches his attention. The camera focuses on a paramedic who solemnly declares that the woman is dead, apparently having suffocated while in the sludge villain's grasp. Shocked gasps ripple through the crowd as the camera then focuses on All Might, who looks devastated. The next few minutes are filled with him apologizing repeatedly and expressing his regret, but for some reason he seems a bit restless. Izuku's not the only one that notices, and when All Might abruptly apologizes and says that he must leave, one reporter criticizes him harshly, saying, "You came too late and now you're just going to leave?" Izuku winces. He's sure All Might has his reasons, and he does apologize repeatedly before quickly taking his leave, but his departure doesn't look good to the press. The man beside him shaking his head, not a good day for the heroes. Izuku swallows and then sighs. Even if it didn't end so well, it was still cool to see All Might. Unfortunately, thanks to the #1 hero, it's now drizzling and he doesn't have an umbrella. "I guess I should go home then," he murmurs to himself, then winces. He hopes he doesn't run into Kaken. He'd like to avoid that confrontation for as long as possible. He checks his phone, which is still set on silent since he was in school, and wrinkles his nose at the numerous text messages and missed calls from Kaken. The last one was sent 5 minutes ago. Thankfully, it seems he hasn't said anything to Inko, or otherwise Izuku would have over 100 missed messages. Ignoring the blonde's texts, Izuku pockets his phone and starts walking again. He figures he can find his way home if he can just find a familiar landmark. Of course, he could also probably just search up a map, but it's kind of exciting being out on his own. A bit nerve-wracking since he's lost his protection, but exciting nonetheless. It's like he's exploring, and the best part is that he decides what turns to take instead of just following Kaken around. It doesn't take very long for him to find a familiar street. It's fairly empty at this time of day, so he relaxes slightly, enjoying the setting sun beaming on him as he walks down the street. The drizzle has faded away by now, leaving everything slightly damp. Izuku is in the midst of pulling his hair up into a ponytail when the sound of harsh coughing startles him. Pausing, he glances around before following the source of the noise. It leads him towards an alleyway, which makes him a bit nervous. He's always avoided alleys since that day, but they're in a relatively nice neighborhood, so he cautiously continues walking until he can peek his head around the corner. A tall skeleton of a man is leaning heavily against the wall. His eyes are closed and he seems to gasp for breath. Izuku frowns. He doesn't like the sound of that. Every inhale and exhale is slightly gurgly, like there's something wet in his lungs that he can't get out. And he looks awfully skinny, especially in those clothes that are obviously much too large for him. There's also something weirdly familiar about him, so Izuku doesn't feel particularly unsafe as he slowly steps into the alley. Excuse me, sir?" The skeletal man startles, his eyes flying open. Izuku startles too and raises his hands placating. I am sorry," he apologizes. "I didn't mean to surprise you, it's just, are you all right?" The man swallows thickly and nods. Izuku frowns and steps a bit closer. "Are you sure?" he asks, keeping his voice light and friendly. "You don't look so good. Do you need help, or is there someone I can call for you?" No, the man finally speaks, his voice sounding raspy. "I'm fine, really, it's just an old dash." Just then, Izuku notices the BLD in his hand and his eyes widen. "Oh my gosh," he gasps, rushing over to his side. You're hurt." The man looks down at his hand, as if he just noticed the BL. "Oh no, this is nothing really." He gives what Izuku assumes is a grim attempt at a smile. "I just dash." Then the man suddenly chokes and BLD spews out of his mouth and right onto Izuku's face. Izuku recoils in disgust and takes a couple of steps back, but the stranger immediately starts fretting over him. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry." He sputters apologies, BLD still dribbling down his chin. Here, I can help, let me just dash." Izuku tenses when the man places his large hands on his shoulders to steady him and immediately reaches up to grab them. But as soon as his fingers make contact with the skin on the man's wrists, his quirk activates, letting him feel the energy flowing through the man. He goes still. Holy shit, he can't help but whisper, his eyes wide as he stares at the man's. Usually, when a person is injured, their energy will swirl around the points of their injuries as the body attempts to heal naturally. But this man, not only does he have a huge mass of swirling energy on his left flank, there are some areas where the energy is just missing. Where his left lung and stomach should be, there's no energy at all. It's as if the organs aren't there. It's a horrible wound to feel, and it causes tears to prick at Izuku's eyes. Finally managing to tear his gaze away from the man's, he stares up into his eyes and whispers breathlessly, "You're really hurt, aren't you?" The man pauses in his fretting and looks down at him, a confused expression on his face. "What are you talking about?" He gently tries to pull his hands away, but Izuku doesn't let him, tightening his grip on the man's wrists. "Young man, what are you doing?" Izuku's quirk activated as soon as he touched the man's skin, immediately reacting to his wounds. But Izuku has never healed an injury this severe before. He can't control his energy as it flows out of him rapidly, trying to reach the wounds as fast as possible, trying to fill what's missing. He feels like his energy is being drained out of him, and he wobbles on his feet, the man's hands pressing down on his shoulders to steady him. Kid, are you all right?" Izuku can't respond. The man keeps talking, keeps asking something, but it all washes over his ears like a wave. He can barely think. All he knows is that he can't stop the energy from leaving him, and it's terrifying. He's never tried to stop the flow before, but it's also never taken this long to heal someone before. Usually the minor injuries he heals vanish almost instantly, but his energy has rapidly flowing out of him for nearly a minute now. Black dots dance across his vision and his knees buckle. "Kid!" The stranger cries, struggling to hold him upright. He ends up pressed against his side, the side with that horrible wound, and his quirk sings, reaching out for the wound that he can practically feel through the man's shirt, and the last thing Izuku sees are worried blue eyes peering down at him before his world turns black. "Kid, what the hell?" Tashinori leans over the boy as he gently lays him onto the ground. The boy remains unconscious, leaving Tashinori to wonder what the hell is going on. "Sheet!" He curses to himself, ready to pull out his phone and call an ambulance. For some reason, though, he pauses. Ever since the boy grabbed his wrists, he's been feeling strange. He immediately figured it was the boy's quirk and made to move away, but the boy didn't want to let him go, and, well, whatever he was doing, it didn't feel bad. Gran Torino would probably scold him and say something about quirks being deceiving, but the kid didn't seem like the type to have malicious intentions. If anything, it looked like he activated his quirk by accident. Either way, Tashinori let the curious warm feeling flow into him, and now he feels energized. Which is strange because only a minute ago he felt like he was about to cough up his only lung. And not only does he feel energized, but he feels like he could stay in his muscled form for another 3 hours if he wanted to. Tashinori looks down at the boy, wondering what exactly his quirk is. Well, whatever it is, it clearly affected the boy rather negatively. So, he puffs up into his muscled form, surprised that it doesn't hurt as much as he thought it would, and scoops the kid into his arms, backpack and all. Then he takes off into the sky, aiming for the nearest hospital. He makes sure to clean his BLD off of the kid's face before he lands. When the paramedics ask what happened, he makes up a quick lie and says that he just found the boy alone and unconscious in an alley. They believe him without question, of course, and he leaves after that. Normally he would probably go back to his apartment at this time of day, but since he's feeling so great he decides that it wouldn't hurt to stay out longer. There's something that he wanted to do tomorrow, but now. He finds the family of the woman who was killed by the sludge villain a mere couple hours before and personally apologizes to them, bowing low to the ground. He doesn't quite know how well they take it. The woman's death is so fresh and there's a good chance they blame him for it, because he sure does, but in the end they thank him, especially when he insists on paying for her funeral. After getting their information and sending it over to his agency, he gives his condolences once more before leaving. It's a pity he wasn't able to reach the woman in time to save her. He'd felt like such an idiot when he realized that the bottle he'd trapped the sludge villain in earlier had fallen out of his pocket while jumping through the sky, then he'd ended up wasting even more of his precious time searching for the villain again. Thankfully, he'd had just enough energy to defeat the BSTRD again when he saw the ruckus downtown, but by then it had been too late. Staying to talk to the press had been awful. He'd just been barely holding his hero form, and then leaving right after the woman's death was announced? That looked bad, really bad, even for the #1 hero, and he knows his agency will probably have to deal with some bad press in the coming days. But for now, he pours himself into his work for the next couple of hours, taking down villain after villain until he decides to retire for the night. He still has some energy left, but he doesn't want to risk ending up in a situation like he'd been in earlier when he'd gotten too tired to hold his hero form and deflated in an alleyway, so he heads back to his apartment. He's just about to get into the shower when it happens. A low rumbling noise erupts from his abdomen. He startles so badly he nearly slips and clutches the edge of the shower to steady himself. Eyes wide, he looks down at his torso in surprise. Is it just him, or is his scar just slightly smaller than it used to be? Jaw slackening, he raises his head and gazes at himself in the mirror above his sink. No, he's spent hours staring at this scar in disgust before, and it's definitely looking less horrible than it usually does, if only slightly. The low rumbling sound returns, and with it a stab of pain. Toshinori chokes. The feeling is so alien and yet so familiar, but he hasn't felt it in 5 years. There's no way he could possibly dash? No, there's no way. What happened? What? The boy. As soon as his eyes widen in realization, his stomach growls again. His stomach? The one that he lost to all for 5 years ago, the one that most certainly wasn't there this morning. Completely forgetting about the shower, Toshinori scrambles for his phone and dials a number. Come on, Tosin. We need to talk. Izuku wakes up in complete darkness. His brain feels light and foggy, and it takes him a few moments to process that he is, in fact, awake. When it finally registers, he abruptly jolts into a sitting position and immediately regrets it when a wave of nausea makes his stomach roll. Struggling not to GG, he lets out a small groan, the sound thin and miserable coming from his incredibly dry throat. He swallows thickly and glances around, spotting a glass of water sitting on an unfamiliar nightstand next to his unfamiliar bed. When he moves to reach for it, the world seems to shift beneath him and the nausea returns with a vengeance as he's slammed with a wave of dizziness. Choking back a whine, he manages to wrap his trembling fingers around the glass and brings it back towards himself, not without spilling some water on the sheets. He hastily gulps it down until his stomach churns with dissatisfaction, then shakily wipes his mouth and glances around again. It looks like he's in some sort of hospital room. His mother is fast asleep in a chair next to his bed, and there's a needle in his forearm connected to N4. As his eyes land on her, his vision swims and he lets his body lean back against his pillows, wishing for the dreadful wave of dizziness to stop. What the hell is going on? He's never felt so nauseous and lightheaded before in his life. What happened to him? A flash of blonde, a horrible empty chasm of energy, his quirk flowing, his quirk singing. Oh, Izuku blinks. That man. He remembers the skeletal man from earlier. How he tried to heal that horrible wound of his. How his quirk wouldn't turn off. He must have drained his own energy so much that he passed out. That would explain why he's currently in a hospital. The man probably called an ambulance. He relaxes slightly. That man had been strange, and his injury was even stranger. He wonders how he got so hurt in the first place. If he didn't know any better, he would have thought the man had been missing a couple of organs, what with the way his energy has been absent in some places. Even though he passed out, Izuku hopes he managed to heal him at least a little bit. Coughing up BLD must not be fun. His hand trembles violently when he moves to set the now empty glass back on the nightstand, but he somehow manages to do it quietly. He also spots his phone next to a digital clock that says 3 a.m. Grabbing it, he turns it on and, after grimacing against the harsh light that makes his head spin even worse for a solid minute, checks to see what he missed. The first thing he notices is the date. At first, he thinks it must be wrong, but then he sees all the texts from Kaken he ignored after he ran away, and they're all from 2 days ago. He's been unconscious for 2 days. Shocked, his head WHPs towards his mother, an action he regrets as it triggers both dizziness and nausea to Rebound, who is still fast asleep. He can't see very well in the low light, but he can tell that she's looking a lot more ragged and exhausted than she usually does. Guilt stabs at his heart. It feels like all he does is worry her. Sighing, he averts his eyes and sinks back into his pillows. It's probably best to let her get as much sleep as she can. He doesn't feel so bad if he doesn't move around too much, so he turns back to his phone. Still ignoring Kaken's texts, he instead checks his social media feed. He follows plenty of All Might fan accounts, and most of them are still talking about the sludge villain incident from earlier. Apparently All Might paid a visit to the deceased woman's family later that day and personally apologized. Izuku smiles a bit, continuing to scroll. Another post catches his attention, this time from one of the All Might spotting accounts he follows. He clicks on it and his eyes widen into saucers. Only half an hour after the sludge incident, All Might was spotted carrying a young teenage boy into a hospital. And that boy is him. He stares at the picture in shock. It's angled so his face isn't quite visible, but there's no doubt about it. That's his hair, that's his clothes, that's his backpack. Holy shit. All Might took him to the hospital. The #1 hero saved him. Heart leaping into his throat, he struggles not to squeal out loud and wake up his mother. This is so crazy. He met his hero. Well, sort of thing. He wishes he had been conscious. In the back of his mind, he wonders why the skeletal man didn't just call an ambulance for him. He figures that All Might must have come across them right after he passed out, but something about that doesn't sit right. He looks down at the picture again, noticing that All Might was still wearing the same clothes from the sludge incident. He thinks of the skeletal man and how he seemed so weirdly familiar. He thinks of the clothes that hung off his skinny frame and realizes that they looked exactly like All Might's clothes. That's a strange coincidence, but it doesn't mean anything. Maybe Izuku thought he seemed familiar because his clothes were so similar to All Might's, who he'd seen on the TV earlier that day. But there's just something about the way his clothes were just so obviously big for him, as if they were meant for someone much larger than him. His eyes widen. No way. No freaking way. There's no way All Might could be so skinny, so injured. But maybe that's why he had to leave the sludge incident so suddenly. Izuku! Izuku startles out of his thoughts, glancing over at his mother who is blinking at him blearily. As soon as their eyes meet, she perks up and lunges at him, throwing her arms around his shoulders and immediately bursting into tears. Izuku! She wails, "You're okay? You're okay?" Izuku grunts, feeling slightly suffocated, and pats her back comfortingly. As soon as she calms down enough to pull away, she cries, "What happened, Izuku, what happened?" Huh. He tilts his head, bewildered. "I could ask you the same thing." "Oh," she gasps, straightening up. "Oh, right, of course. This must be very confusing for you." She lets out a wet giggle, although Izuku isn't really sure why, and wipes her own tears away. You passed out from Quirk exhaustion, sweetie. The doctors said your vitals were low, so your body went into a comatose state in order to regain your strength. And guess what? They said that All Might was the one to bring you in. Apparently he found you alone and unconscious in an alley, so he brought you to the hospital. Izuku's eyes widen for an entirely different reason, but Inko misreads his reaction and giggles. "I know, right? I was surprised too. I guess I'll have to join one of your All Might fan clubs after this." Inko continues to ramble on about what he's missed over the past couple of days, but Izuku isn't paying attention. He's too busy freaking out as his mind makes connections against his will. All Might found him alone. Alone, as in, without the skeletal man that he used his quirk on. He briefly wonders if the skeletal man perhaps just left him there and ran off after he passed out, but for some reason Izuku doesn't think he'd be the type of person to do that, even though he hardly knows him. But if that man was All Might, then he would have just taken Izuku to the hospital himself. It's really too much for his mind to handle right now. He doesn't even know what he'd do if he found out this is true, that All Might really is like that. Even though he's awake now, he's still extremely tired and nauseous, and his mind is so boggled and confused that he decides to just forget about it for now. "Izuku." The boy looks up at his mother as she asks, "What we don't know is what made you lose so much energy in the first place." She looks so nervous, and Izuku knows he can't tell her about the not All Might man that he met, so instead he just quickly comes up with a lie. He stammers, I came across a dog that had been hit by a car and I tried to heal him with my quirk. But, it was really hurt and I guess I used too much energy. I tried to stop when I felt like I was going to pass out, but for some reason I couldn't make my quirk stop. I couldn't even move, it was weird. He finishes lamely and winces. Well, at least the last part isn't a lie. He's still pretty disturbed about that too, but he'll think about it later when the more pressing matters are settled. Inko relaxes in her chair and smiles, reaching out to hold onto his hand. That's good, she sighs, then corrects herself. I mean, not good, you definitely should never try something like that again, but I'm just glad it was something that you did and not the fault of some villain. Izuku blinks and shakes his head rapidly, then regrets it when a wave of dizziness hits him. No, it was just me, he says, but has to pause and press a hand to his head when the dizziness lasts a few seconds. Inko frowns. Izuku? Sweetie, are you okay? Yeah, he replies, I just got a little lightheaded. When she continues to look worried, he decides to change the subject. So, what did you do while I was asleep? Oh, Mitsuki-san and Masaru-san have been keeping me company for the past couple of days, so has Katsuki-kun. She trails off and Izuku sighs. He said that you ran off after you two got into an argument, and that's why you were alone when you overused your quirk? Izuku nods once, not saying anything. Inko is obviously curious and gazes at him expectantly. When he still remains silent, she adds, he didn't really tell us what the fight was about. He just said that you got upset? Izuku shrinks under his mother's gaze as she continues to gaze at him, waiting patiently. Eventually, he looks down at his sheets and mumbles, he was being a J. Inko waits for more, but that's all he's going to say. He's still set at Kaken, but he knows that if he tells Inko about it, then she'll just give him a lecture about why he should forgive him. He's not going to forgive him that easily. Not this time. Thankfully, after a few moments of silence, Inko just sighs and leans back into her chair. You look tired, honey, she says, get some more sleep. We'll talk in the morning. She curls back up into her chair and Izuku reluctantly sinks into his pillows once more. He's grateful that she's not pressuring him to talk about it. And even with his mind still whirling from everything that happened, the fight, the not all might, the quirk exhaustion, he still finds himself falling asleep within minutes after his head hits the pillows. When he wakes up again, it's light outside. A quick glance at the clock tells him it's 8 a.m. and his mother is already up and about. She goes to call a doctor as soon as he wakes up and they check him over fairly quickly, taking his vitals while telling him how his quirk exhaustion affected him. He still feels terribly weak, although the nap did help a bit, so they want to monitor him for the rest of the day just to be safe, but they expect that he'll be able to go home by dusk. He's in the middle of eating an extremely healthy breakfast when the Bakugas burst into his room. Izuku! Auntie Mitsuki cries, and the next thing he knows he's being squeezed tightly by the woman. Damn it, kid, you scared the shit out of us? Sorry. He squeaks, squirming in discomfort. Uncle Masaru gently pulls his wife away before expressing his relief to Izuku in a much more mellow manner. Izuku smiles and they chat with him and Inko for a bit, mostly about Izuku's condition and what this will mean for the future. Meanwhile, Izuku pointedly ignores glancing over at Kaken, who remains by the doorway, sulking with his hands shoved unnecessarily deep into his pockets. Izuku can see that his nose is clearly bruised from when he headbutt him, but he doesn't feel bad about it in the slightest. Uncle Masaru, of course, is the first to notice the tension between them and mutters something to his wife. Auntie Mitsuki immediately straightens up and grabs Kaken by the arm, dragging him fully into the room while he shrieks indignantly. I don't know what the F you did to PSS off Izuku enough to make him run away, but you're gonna F&J fix it right now. Auntie Mitsuki shoves Kaken towards Izuku and he just barely catches himself on the railing beside his bed. Talk about it, dumb. She snaps as she proceeds to usher Uncle Masaru and Inko out of the room, and if I hear you yelling I'm gonna come in here and kick your butt. The door slams shut with a loud bang, leaving the two boys alone. Kaken grimaces and glances at Izuku, but the latter is stubbornly avoiding his gaze. He simply turns his head the other way and closes his eyes. There's no way in hell that he's going to be the first to apologize. Not this time. Not when it's obviously Kaken's fault for being such a jerk. However, it seems that Kaken doesn't want to be the first to speak either. He just grits his teeth and glares at the ground, silently seething. Neither of them make a sound for nearly 2 minutes. As the silence continues, Izuku feels his irritation grow and grow. Well, since Kaken clearly doesn't plan on saying anything for once in his life, then Izuku's sure as hell going to make sure what he has to say is heard. I'm gonna go first. He bites out and Kaken's head snaps up, and you're going to freaking listen. You're not going to interrupt me or talk over me or anything, none of that, see, alright? Kaken stares at him, then clenches his jaw and glances away in response. Good, Izuku says. He takes a deep breath before he starts. I didn't like all that shit that you said about me. How you think I'm just some guy with a healing quirk and that I need to learn my place? Kaken's gaze is on him again and Izuku glares at him. You don't get to decide what my place is, Kaken. I'm my own person, and I'm going to decide what my place is. I'm going to be more than just a guy with a healing quirk, and I'm going to be more than just your healer. I don't care if that pisses you off. We've always ever done things your way, you know? Ever since my quirk manifested, it's like you've already decided everything for me. You've decided that I'm going to work in your hero agency, that I'm going to be your healer, and then you think that you can just decide when I can and can't use my quirk? My own DMN quirk? His voice starts to rise with his anger, so he stops and takes another deep breath. When he speaks again, his voice is calm but no less firm. Have you ever considered what I wanted? Because I've never even thought I could consider that until now. I've been so wrapped up just being a little piece in your MSTR plan for your own life that I never considered that I could want something different. So, I'm going to decide stuff for myself now. I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up in the future, but whatever it is, you're just going to have to deal with it. Kaken had been fidgeting impatiently ever since he started talking, but now he steps forward and snaps. Listen here, you little dash. I'm not effing done. Izuku interrupts him. You don't get to say your part until I've said mine. Kaken glares at him with fiery red eyes, grinding his teeth audibly, but he says nothing. Izuku tries again. Now, in regards to Harukuin, that little fucker deserved it. Kaken explodes. He deserved every bit of dash. But Auntie Mitsuki's voice shouts through the door. Don't make me come in there, brat. Kaken snarls wordlessly at the door but falls silent. Izuku immediately continues. He did not deserve to be treated that way, he says firmly, especially not by someone who's aiming to be a hero. Kaken flinches ever so slightly. How do you think things will go in UA, Kaken? You think they'll just let shit like that fly? Heroes aren't supposed to want to hurt people, Kaken. And damn it, I'm allowed to have friends other than you. Harukuin is nice to me and makes me laugh and smile. If you really cared about me, you would be happy about that. But no, you just get jealous because God forbid you don't get to hog me to yourself. And it's not just him. Ever since junior high started, you've just been downright mean to people and I don't get it. Does it make you feel better to push other people down? Does it make you feel big and strong when you beat them up? Well, let me tell you something, Kaken, all it does is make you look pathetic. And I meant what I said back there too. I will never stay by your side if all you do is hurt people. Kaken stares at him with wide eyes, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly. After a few moments of him struggling uselessly to find his words, he grits his teeth and glares. So, what are you effing saying then? He growls. What? You don't want to be friends anymore? Is that it? Izuku groans. No, Kaken, I just dashed. He sighs heavily and rubs his face tiredly. I just need some space. You're just so controlling, Kaken. And possessive. And what we have isn't healthy. We're never going to grow if we're attached to the hip all the time. I want to be able to figure things out by myself and figure out what I want to do with my life without having to work our friendship into my plans as well. If we're true friends, then we won't even have to work to stay in each other's lives. We'll just naturally always be there for each other. We need some space, Kaken. Kaken is quiet for a long time after that. He opens his mouth, looking like he wants to go on a rant of his own, but then he closes it. He glares at Izuku for a while, then at the ground. His fists clench and unclench repeatedly as he thinks, displaying his anger. Finally, he tosses his head and scoffs, whatever. Izuku must look disappointed because he adds, I mean, yeah, whatever. I still gotta walk you to school and shit, but whatever, you follow around whoever the F you want to when we're in school. See if I care. He swallows, scowling as he shoves his hands back into his pockets. And I'll stop beating people up. For you, he grumbles. It's not enough. No, not for me, Izuku presses. I want you to stop hurting people because you know it's wrong. Kaken rolls his eyes and huffs. Sure, whatever. The kids at school are weak but losers anyway. It's not perfect. It wasn't even an apology, really. Izuku still has a bad taste in his mouth when Kaken leaves the room, but it's something. The beginnings of progress. Now Izuku just has to wait and see if Kaken will keep his word. And if he does, they'll go from there. Shoulders feeling slightly lighter, Izuku spends the rest of the morning in bed. A doctor comes in later to check on him and has him walk around a bit to see if he's steady. Despite the lightheadedness and nausea returning with the movement, he somehow is able to walk on his own, but his legs tremble with the effort and he ends up leaning against the wall for support after just a minute. His mother, of course, is extremely concerned, but the doctor says his body is still trying to rebuild its energy after it was depleted so suddenly and to expect some weakness for the next few days. He's having lunch when he's told that some people are here to see him. He sighs, glancing down at his half-eaten sandwich. What's with people interrupting him when he eats? First the Bakugas and now who's here? Inko frowns and glances at him questioningly, but he shrugs, just as clueless as she is. His mother gets up and goes to speak with the doctor in hushed voices. Izuku can't hear what they're saying, but he tenses up when Inko gasps. She nods frantically and goes to stand beside Izuku while the doctor goes to open the door. Mom, what's going dash? Izuku's jaw drops when the door swings open and Recovery Girl walks into his room. Like, the Recovery Girl. She's in his room. He's in the same room as Recovery Girl. He doesn't think he can get any more surprised, but then Not All Might walks in right after her. His eyes must be as wide as dinner plates and he must be catching flies with how low his jaw is hanging, but he can't bring himself to react in any other way aside from utter shock. Recovery Girl smiles at him and he nearly dies. As she moves to sit on a chair next to his bed, she greets, "Hello, Midoriya-kun." Izuku lets out a strangled noise. She knows his name. The healer chuckles at his reaction and it's enough to make him snap his jaw closed. He blushes furiously and stammers out in a high-pitched voice, "Hello. Recovery Girl. You're Recovery Girl. Hi." This time when she laughs, so does Not All Might. Izuku turns to him apprehensively. If he's here, then that must mean something, right? Why would a random stranger come to see him unless he was? But could he really be All Might? Could the #1 hero really be this scrawny? Izuku is dying to ask a million questions like, who are you and what the hell is going on? Not All Might is watching him intently, as if he's trying to read his thoughts. Izuku gulps and glances back at Recovery Girl, who he now notices is watching him just as intently as Not All Might. He doesn't know what to say. "Thank you for showing us the way, Sugawara-san," Recovery Girl says. It takes Izuku a moment to realize she's talking to his doctor. "Do you mind if I talked to Midoriya-kun privately for a moment?" The doctor nods and quickly leaves. It isn't until Recovery Girl turns to Inko expectantly that she realizes she means her too. "Oh." Inko jumps in surprise. Are you sure?" She glances between her son and the two adults nervously, her gaze lingering on Not All Might. Obviously she isn't too keen on leaving her only son with strangers. "Mom," Izuku stresses, "come on, it's Recovery Girl." He emphasizes her name as if just that will convince his mother that she's trustworthy. It's enough for Inko. Right, of course. Inko hurriedly gathers her coat and purse and steps out of the room. "My apologies. Take as much time as you need." The door shuts behind her and Izuku turns to the two adults. Not All Might opens his mouth to speak, but before he can, Izuku's restraint breaks. "Are you All Might?" he blurts out. The man blinks in surprise. Slapping his hands over his mouth, Izuku mentally curses himself before stammering, I'm sorry. It's such a weird and random question, but when I thought about it, it made sense because your clothes were the same as his when he was fighting the sludge villain and when he brought me to the hospital, but they said he found me alone, but you were there dash. Young Midoriya dash. And I thought maybe you ditched me, but then I kept thinking and wondering about your injury and how All Might had to leave so suddenly when he fought the slime villain dash. Young Midoriya dash. But it's crazy, right? I mean, there's no way All Might can look like you. Not that you look bad or anything, but you just look very different and dash. Not All Might sighs heavily and suddenly inflates? There's no other way to describe it, but the next thing Izuku knows, there's a very big and very real All Might standing before him. Izuku chokes. Recovery Girl, seeming very disgruntled but not at all surprised, glares at All Might and says, "Thanks for the warning, you drama queen." All Might grins briefly before shrinking back down into the skinny stranger that he'd met a couple of days ago. Well, he shrugs sheepishly, sitting down into another chair with a huff. He basically figured it out anyway. To Izuku he asks, "You're a clever one, aren't you?" The noises that are coming out of Izuku's mouth don't even sound human anymore. This can't be real. There's no way that All Might is in his room right now. In this form. Even though Izuku was thinking about it, he didn't really expect his theory to ever be confirmed. But now, he gawks. But I don't understand is what he wants to say. But then All Might's words sink in and he hesitates, taking a moment to try and focus his racing mind. Your injury, he stammers, looking up at the number one hero. It makes you like this? All Might nods seriously. You know how guys at the pool are always skiing in and flexing and try to hold their buff? I'm like that. His words completely contradict his grave attitude. Izuku sputters and Recovery Girl rolls her eyes. Oh, come on. You owe this poor boy an explanation, especially before. She trails off and Izuku frowns. Before what? Right? Sorry. All Might apologizes, then looks at Izuku. I hope I don't have to tell you how important it is that you don't tell this to anyone. Right? Izuku yelps, spine nearly snapping as he straightens up immediately. Of course. All Might saves everyone and wins the day with a fearless smile. If people knew about your injury... All Might nods again. Good, so you understand then. Izuku blanks. Not really. He's completely unprepared for the gruesome injury the number one hero reveals when he lifts up his shirt. It's an ugly, gnarled scar that spreads all across his left torso, and Izuku instantly knows that this is the injury he felt when he used his quirk on the man. I got this from an enemy's attack 5 years ago, All Might explains with a grimace. Believe it or not, before I met you it looked a lot worse. Worse? Izuku squeaks in disbelief. It already looks so horrible. Half of my respiratory organs were destroyed, All Might goes on, and I lost my whole stomach. I've become emaciated from repeated surgeries and the aftereffects. That's terrible, Izuku whispers. As All Might lowers his shirt, he asks, you said 5 years ago, so was it your fight with Toxic Chainsaw? Hey, you know your stuff, kid. Izuku blushes. But no, a punk like that couldn't defeat me. I asked that this fight not be made public to the world. All Might gives a pale imitation of his signature smile. It's more of a grimace. I will save people with a smile. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. However, deep down I was very afraid. My body has been steadily failing me over the past 5 years, and no matter how many healers I saw, none of them could fix what that villain had done to me. Izuku is quiet as All Might leans forward in his chair, his gaze intense. So imagine my surprise when a 14-year-old boy stumbles upon me hacking my lung out in the middle of an alley and proceeds to not only give me enough energy to maintain my muscle form for hours afterwards, but to also regrow my entire stomach. Izuku doesn't quite process that right away. Huh? He squeaks. Huh? What? All Might tilts his head. You didn't know? No. Izuku is beyond shocked. No way. I had never tried healing such a large wound before. And I've never really had quirk exhaustion before. He trails off anxiously, pulling at the edge of his shirt. A whole stomach. All Might turns to share a glance with Recovery Girl. The woman straightens up a bit and asks, Midoriya-kun, do you mind telling us how your quirk works? Oh, right. Of course. This is far from the first time Izuku has had to explain his quirk to someone, so the explanation comes easy to him. It's called healing energy. Basically, as soon as I touch someone's skin, my quirk will activate and, depending on whether or not they're injured, release a flow of my own energy into their body to heal their wounds. I can also sense a person's own natural energy and it helps me tell where and what their injuries are, although it's not super specific. It also doesn't work with illnesses or when I myself am injured. And, something I noticed when I was healing All Might? I can't seem to be able to stop my quirk once it's activated. I mean, I had never really tried to before since I only ever healed minor injuries. So, I think that's why I passed out. B. Because your injury required more energy than I had to give. All Might and Recovery Girl are staring at him with mixed expressions of curiosity and solemnity. Shrinking a bit under the attention, Izuku scratches the back of his head nervously. I guess I don't really have that much control over my quirk, really. It kind of just does its thing. He laughs awkwardly. Yes, Recovery Girl says, frowning, that was really quite a dangerous thing for you to do, Midoriya-kun. Frankly, I've never heard of a healing quirk powerful enough to regrow lost limbs or organs. Usually that's only the case for some self-healing or self-regeneration quirks. And the fact that your quirk is fueled by your own energy. Well, it was a very reckless thing to do without proper training. However, it sounds like you didn't quite know to what extent your quirk would go to heal. Alright. Izuku nods. Do you want to be a healer? All Might asks suddenly. Izuku looks at him in surprise. Huh. A healer? Surely you must have heard of them. He nods and the man asks, well? A small, bashful smile creeps onto his lips as he looks down at his lap. I've wanted to be a healer ever since my quirk manifested, he admits. All Might smiles. Well, I think you'll be a fantastic healer, young Midoriya. Izuku nearly passes out. All Might laughs as he starts sputtering. I'm serious, kid. He barks, I've seen just about every single one of the most powerful healers out there and none of them were able to do what you have done for me. Young Midoriya, All Might leans closer and puts a large hand on his shoulder, his gaze firm. I ate a cheeseburger yesterday. It's such an odd and out-of-place statement that Izuku can't help the disbelieving laugh that escapes his lips. What? Recovery Girl rolls her eyes. And since he's barely been eating for the past 5 years, he threw up the entire thing 20 minutes later. It was worth it, All Might says resolutely. And it happened thanks to you. Flustered, Izuku ducks his head. But I didn't even know I could do something like that, he says. I knew my quirk was powerful, but... Your quirk is powerful, Recovery Girl says. I knew that as soon as All Might told me about you. And I'm glad to hear that you want to become a healer, because now I can make my offer without much trouble. Izuku blinks. Offer? I want you to come to UA so that I can personally train you, Recovery Girl says, and Izuku's heart stops. You what? It's one of the reasons we came here today, actually, All Might says. Well, 1 because I wanted to thank you, and 2 because we figured it would be a good opportunity for everyone involved. You're in your 3rd year of junior high, right? Izuku nods. Then I can get you into the hero course through recommendations? Izuku can hardly process all this. Why the hero course? But my quirk, it's not combative. Yes, but healers are, in fact, considered heroes, Recovery Girl explains. There are a lot of different ways you can serve as a healer. Some are combat medics, meaning they're often on the scene with heroes ready to provide medical aid. Others are part of rescue teams that save civilians in events like natural disasters. No matter what you choose to do, you're going to need to learn how to fight and be able to handle yourself in dangerous situations. Izuku listens with rapt attention. He'd never even considered all those other skills he'd need to know. He's just been relying on his quirk so much. But still, he asks, the hero course? Would I really be able to get through it with a non-combative quirk? Most of the classes in the day of a student in the hero course consists of general education classes, which you will take along with your classmates. As for the hero classes, you would participate unless the lesson involves the students directly using their quirk for combat or particular situations. Which might seem like all of them, but don't worry. A lot of the classes also focus on basic fighting skills and preparing the students for a variety of different situations and scenarios. And whenever you aren't participating in a class, you'll be on standby in case someone gets hurt, which, in the hero course, is often. Recovery Girl huffs at this before continuing. I know perhaps this wasn't what you were expecting out of your high school experience, But in the hero course you'll be presented with more opportunities to heal bigger injuries and train your quirk. Once she's finished, the two pro-heroes gaze at him expectantly. Izuku blinks rapidly, trying to process the sudden onslaught of information. This is better than anything he could have asked for. He's getting the chance to train with Recovery Girl? To get into UA through recommendations? It's too good to be true. He's still not entirely convinced that this isn't all just a dream. But there's just something he still doesn't quite understand. Thank you, he says breathlessly. Thank you so much. This is such a wonderful opportunity. I don't understand. This is so much you're offering to me and I just... Why are you helping me? They stare at him as if they're confused by his question. Looking down at his lap, he wrings his hands as he continues in a soft voice. My mother told me when I was younger that people would want me for my quirk. That both heroes and villains would seek me out. And I just remember thinking that was so weird. That I'm desirable to people I don't even know. And I just can't help but wonder. All Might stops him before he can continue. He leans forward and places a hand over Izuku's, stopping them. Young Midoriya, he says, his blue eyes piercing, would you have healed me even if you knew the effect it would have on you? Would you have sacrificed yourself for my sake? Izuku frowns, confused. Yes, of course. All Might smiles and leans back, seemingly satisfied. Well, then there's your answer. The very core of being a healer, no, of being a hero, is having the will to sacrifice oneself for another. All Might says, young Midoriya, you would be a great healer even if you were quirkless? Izuku inhales sharply, his wide eyes filling with tears. He quickly averts his gaze, but he can't help letting a couple of tears escape and roll down his cheeks. He clutches at the warm feeling blooming in his eye as the corner of his lips twitch up into a smile. He didn't realize how badly he needed to hear those words until now. Thank you, he whispers. All Might dips his head. You know, there are so few healers in the world, we need to stick together, Recovery Girl says gently, and I know you can become a healer that will save countless lives. It would be an honor if you would allow me to train you. Also, she smiles and laughs a little. I'm getting on in years, and with so many injured kids at UA it would be nice to have an apprentice around to help me out. Izuku giggles and nods. Of course. I'd love to. He turns to All Might. And I would be more than happy to heal the rest of your injuries as soon as I am capable. As soon as you've trained your quirk, Recovery Girl says pointedly, you're going to need a much better grasp over that power of yours before you can even consider healing someone like All Might again. I don't want you to go into another coma from quirk exhaustion. Izuku frowns a bit. Right? Looking up at All Might, he says with some worry, I don't know how long that will take, but... All Might interrupts him with a laugh. Young Midoriya, he says warmly, putting a hand on his shoulder, you've already given me more than I ever thought I would have had. Don't worry, I can wait. I'll be more than content to watch you grow into a fine young healer. Smiling, Izuku glances between the two before taking a deep breath. No turning back now. I accept,